Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Laura Adams, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Pisgah National Forest, deep in the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, just last autumn. I've always been the outdoorsy type. Growing up in Asheville meant the mountains were practically my backyard, and after 15 years in Chicago's concrete jungle working as a marketing executive, I needed to reconnect with the wilderness that once centered me. That's why I decided to take 2 weeks off work in October for a solo backpacking trip through parts of the Pisgah forest that tourists rarely visit, particularly the remote trails near Shining Rock Wilderness. My therapist, Dr. Winters, had suggested the trip. "Nature heals," she'd said during our session a month before. "And you need healing, Laura." She wasn't wrong. The divorce from Michael had been finalized 6 months earlier, but the weight of those 8 years together, and particularly the last 2 years of his escalating emotional abuse, still hung around my neck like a stone. I needed to remember who I was before him, who I could be now without him. The first 3 days of my trek were exactly what I needed. The autumn colors were at their peak, brilliant reds and golds spreading across the mountain slopes like wildfire. I followed the Art Loeb Trail to start, then veered onto lesser-used paths marked only by occasional stone cairns. Cell service disappeared on day 1, exactly as I'd hoped. The solitude was purifying. I set up camp each night in small clearings, built modest fires, heated my dehydrated meals, and slept deeply beneath a canopy of stars visible through the increasingly bare branches. Each day, I'd hike further, pushing deeper into the wilderness. My muscles ached pleasantly, my mind gradually clearing of the office politics and divorce trauma that had dominated my thoughts for so long. On the 4th day, I noticed the silence. I'd been hiking since dawn, following a narrow path that wound through a particularly dense section of forest. The trees here were ancient, massive trunks disappearing into a canopy so thick that only dappled sunlight reached the forest floor. The undergrowth was sparse, mostly ferns and mushrooms that thrived in the permanent twilight. But there were no birds, no insects buzzing, no squirrels chattering. I stopped mid-stride, my boot half raised over a gnarled root. The silence pressed against my ears like cotton wool. I could hear my heartbeat, the soft rasp of my breathing, the subtle creak of my backpack straps, but nothing else. No forest sounds at all. "Hello," I called out, then immediately felt foolish. I was miles from the nearest trail that appeared on most maps. There wouldn't be other hikers here. My voice seemed to fall flat as though the air itself absorbed the sound. I checked my watch. 2:17 p.m. Plenty of daylight left, but suddenly I felt an urgency to make camp, to establish some small sense of security before nightfall. I hiked another hour through the silent woods before finding a suitable clearing near a small stream. The water moved without sound, which I told myself was just because it was flowing gently over a smooth stream bed, but I knew that wasn't right. Water always makes some noise. Setting up my tent, I hummed to myself, then sang outright, anything to break the unnatural quiet. My voice sounded wrong somehow, muffled and distant even to my own ears. I built my fire larger than usual, finding comfort in the crackling of the flames, the only sound that seemed to behave normally. As darkness fell, I sat close to the fire, my back to a large oak tree, knife within easy reach. I'd encountered black bears before on previous hikes and knew the protocols, but this felt different. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it felt intentional, watchful. I tried to dismiss the thought as paranoia born from too many horror movies, but the feeling persisted. Just after midnight, I heard it, a twig snapping somewhere in the darkness beyond my firelight. I froze, listening intently. Another snap, closer this time. "Hello," I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" No response, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I added more wood to the fire, building it higher, and pulled my knife from its sheath. The blade caught the firelight, momentarily reassuring me. "I know you're there," I called out with more confidence than I felt. "I'm armed." A low chuckle floated through the darkness, a sound so thoroughly human that it should have been reassuring. Instead, it sent ice down my spine. It was wrong somehow, like someone who had forgotten how laughter was supposed to sound trying to approximate it. "You shouldn't be here, Laura Adams." My name. It knew my name. I stood up quickly, knife clutched in a white-knuckled grip. "Who's there? How do you know my name?" Another chuckle, from a different direction now. "The forest remembers you. From before." "Before what?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Before you were Laura. Before you were anything." I backed closer to the fire, eyes straining to penetrate the darkness. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "What do you want?" I demanded, trying to sound brave. "To welcome you home." Something moved at the edge of the firelight. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, stepped partially into view. It looked like a man, but stretched, elongated in all the wrong ways. His limbs were too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. His face remained in shadow, but I could see his mouth, stretched into a smile that extended too far across his face. "Stay back," I yelled, brandishing the knife. "Or what, Laura?" the figure asked, taking another step forward. "You'll hurt me with that." He gestured at the knife with one impossibly long finger. "I've been hurt before, by better than you." His accent was strange, almost like the local Appalachian dialect, but with something older underneath, something that didn't sound like it belonged to any language I knew. I backed away, circling the fire to keep it between us. "Who are you?" "The locals called my kind slender folk in the old days," he said, his voice slithering into my ears. Before that, the Cherokee had another name. Older, truer. He took another step forward, the firelight illuminating more of his features. His skin wasn't skin at all, but something like rough bark, with deep fissures running across his face. His eyes were hollow spaces filled with what looked like fireflies, pulsing gently. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my back now pressed against a tree. "Company," he said simply. "It gets lonely here, so deep in the old woods. Hikers like you usually stick to the marked trails. Smart of them." He tilted his head at an impossible angle. "But not you. You came looking for me." "No, I didn't," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if they were true. Hadn't I chosen this remote route specifically because something about it called to me? Hadn't I dreamed of these woods for years after leaving North Carolina? "You did," he insisted. "You've been dreaming of this place since you were a little girl, haven't you, Laura? Coming to these woods with your father before he died?" Ice formed in my stomach. My father had taken me camping in Pisgah when I was 8, just months before the car accident that killed him. I'd almost forgotten those trips. "How could you possibly know that?" I whispered. "Because I was there," he said, his grin widening impossibly further. "I watched you both. Your father. He heard me calling too, but he was too afraid to answer." The creature took another step forward. "Not like you." I gripped the knife tighter, though I doubted it would do much against this thing. "Stay back." "Or you'll do what?" "Exactly?" The thing laughed again, that horrible approximation of human mirth. "You're alone out here, Laura. Miles from anyone who might help you. Your phone hasn't had service for days. No one knows exactly where you are." He stepped fully into the firelight now. His body was wrong in every way, limbs too long and bent at impossible angles, fingers ending in what looked like wooden claws. His torso was unnaturally thin, with what appeared to be ribs visible through the bark-like skin, except the ribs moved and shifted like something living independently within him. His head was elongated, hairless, with those terrible glowing eyes and that too wide smile filled with teeth that looked like jagged splinters. "What I want," he said, his voice suddenly dropping to a whisper, "is for you to stay, to become part of the forest, like I did long ago." "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already understood with a primal terror. "The forest needs new blood, new life," he explained, gesturing to the silent woods around us. "It's dying, has been for generations. The old magic is fading, but you," his glowing eyes fixed on me with terrible intensity, "you have the old blood in you. I can smell it. Your ancestors were from these mountains, weren't they?" They were. My father's family had lived in these mountains for generations before he moved to Asheville. Something about what the creature was saying resonated with a half-remembered story my father had told me once, about people disappearing in these woods, about trees that moved at night, about a bargain made long ago. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. "You do," he insisted. "The Adams blood remembers, even if your mind doesn't." He took another step forward. "Your great-grandfather was one of the few who knew how to speak to us, how to make the old offerings, but the knowledge died with him. And now the forest dies too." I remembered suddenly a story about my great-grandfather Benjamin Adams, who'd lived deep in these mountains as a kind of hermit. There were rumors he practiced strange rituals, that he spoke to the trees. My father had mentioned it only once, dismissively, as old family superstition. "What offering?" I asked, stalling for time as I tried to think of a way out of this nightmare. "Life," the creature said simply. "Blood and bone and breath given willingly to the forest." My heart pounded against my ribs. "Human sacrifice? You're insane." "Not sacrifice," the creature corrected, sounding almost offended. "Transformation. Those who give themselves to the forest become part of it. They live forever in the trees, in the earth, in creatures like me." He gestured to himself. "I was like you once. Human, afraid, alone. Now I am so much more. You want me to, what, die? Let you kill me?" "Not die, change." The creature extended one long, gnarled hand. "Come with me. I'll show you the others who chose this path. You'll understand then." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew I wouldn't get far in the darkness. This thing clearly knew these woods better than I ever could. My only hope was to survive until daylight. I need time to think," I said. The creature tilted its head again, regarding me curiously. "Time means little here, but dawn comes regardless. I will return tomorrow night for your answer." He stepped backwards, melting into the shadows. "Don't try to leave, Laura Adams. The forest knows you now. It won't let you go easily." And then he was gone, leaving me alone with the crackling fire and the oppressive silence of the woods. I didn't sleep. How could I? I sat with my back against a tree, knife in hand, watching the darkness for any sign of the creature's return. When dawn finally broke, I packed my camp with trembling hands and began hiking back the way I'd come, moving as quickly as I dared through the underbrush. The forest seemed different in daylight, less threatening, but somehow more alive. The silence remained, but now I noticed other things. The way the branches seemed to reach toward me as I passed, how the path I'd followed the day before seemed narrower, less defined. The sensation of eyes watching me from behind every trunk and boulder. By midday, I realized I was lost. Landmarks I remembered from yesterday were either missing or altered somehow. The stream I'd camped beside should have led me back to a larger creek I'd crossed earlier, but instead it vanished underground. My compass spun uselessly, the needle rotating continuously instead of pointing north. Panic rose in my chest. The creature, whatever it was, had said the forest wouldn't let me leave easily. Was this what it meant? Was the forest itself conspiring to keep me here? I forced myself to stop, to breathe. Panic would only make things worse. I needed to think clearly. I climbed the tallest tree I could find, hoping to get my bearings from higher up. The climb was difficult with my pack, but I managed to reach a height where I could see above most of the canopy. What I saw stole my breath away. The forest stretched in every direction, unbroken by roads or clearings. In the far distance, I could make out what should have been the Blue Ridge Parkway, but it was too far. Much too far. I couldn't possibly have hiked this deep into the wilderness in just 4 days. As I stared in disbelief, I noticed movement below me. Not wind through the branches, but deliberate movement. Trees were shifting, slowly, almost imperceptibly, their trunks bending and roots pulling free from the earth. They were changing positions, rearranging themselves like pieces on a chessboard. The forest was alive. Truly alive, not just in the biological sense, but in some ancient, terrible way that defied modern understanding. I climbed down quickly, scraping my hands and arms in my haste. Once on the ground, I picked a direction and started walking, trying to ignore the sensation that the trees were watching me, following me with invisible eyes. Hours passed. The sun began to set. I hadn't found my way out, hadn't even found a landmark I recognized. Exhaustion weighed on me, my muscles aching from the constant hiking. I needed to make camp again, though the thought of spending another night in these woods filled me with dread. I found a small clearing as darkness fell and set up my tent with numb fingers. The silence seemed even more profound than before, pressing against my eardrums like a physical force. I didn't bother with a fire. Part of me wanted to remain invisible, hidden from whatever prowled these woods at night. Huddled in my tent, I finally allowed myself to cry, quiet sobs shaking my body as the last light faded from the sky. I was trapped in an impossible situation, pursued by something I couldn't understand, in a forest that defied natural law. I thought of Dr. Winters, of my friends back in Chicago, of my mother in Florida who would eventually report me missing when I didn't return. Would they ever find me? Or would I become just another mysterious disappearance in these ancient mountains? A tap on my tent jolted me from my thoughts. Not the sound of a branch or acorn falling, but a deliberate tap, 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 like knuckles rapping on a door. "Go away," I whispered. "Laura," came the voice from last night, that horrible approximation of human speech. "It's time to talk." I said nothing, pressing myself against the far side of the tent. "I can see you in there," the voice continued. "Your fear glows like fireflies in the dark." The tent zipper began to move on its own, slowly descending as the entrance opened. I clutched my knife, knowing it was useless but unable to let go of this one tangible defense. The creature's face appeared in the opening, those glowing ember eyes peering in at me, that too wide smile splitting its bark-like face. "Have you considered my offer?" it asked. "There's nothing to consider," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm not giving myself to the forest or whatever you're suggesting. I want to leave." The creature sighed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "You misunderstand the nature of the choice, Laura Adams. You're already part of the forest. You have been since you entered the deep woods. The only question is what form your participation will take." "What does that mean?" I demanded. "It means you can join us willingly, become something greater than human, live forever in the trees and earth and air of this place," the creature explained patiently. "Or you can feed the forest with your death, giving it a few years of nourishment before it hungers again." The smile widened. "Not much of a choice, is it?" "Why me?" I asked. "There must be other hikers, other people who come through these woods." "Few come this deep," the creature said, "and fewer still have the old blood, the bloodline that can hear the forest singing." It tilted its head. "Your great-grandfather understood. He made his offerings. Animals mostly, but occasionally more. He kept the old ways alive. When he died, the forest began to starve." I remembered more of the family stories now, how local farmers had accused my great-grandfather of stealing livestock, how young men from neighboring properties who went looking for evidence sometimes never returned. Stories dismissed as superstition and rural gossip. "I'm not like him," I insisted. "No," the creature agreed, "but you could be something better. Come with me. Let me show you what awaits." Part of me, a small, curious part, untethered from survival instinct, wanted to see, wanted to understand what this thing was offering. But the larger part recoiled in horror. "No," I said firmly. The creature stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Tomorrow night is the dark of the moon. The veil between your world and the deeper forest will be thinnest then. It's when the transformation is easiest." He began to withdraw from the tent opening. "One more day to decide. Laura Adams. Choose wisely." And then he was gone, leaving the tent flap open to the night. I sat motionless for several minutes, straining to hear any sound of the creature's presence. The silence remained absolute. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I fell into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of trees that walked and spoke in human voices. I woke to find my tent surrounded by mushrooms, a perfect circle of pale, slender fungi that hadn't been there when I made camp. They seemed to pulse slightly in the morning light, an optical illusion that made my head spin when I looked at them too long. Carefully stepping over the mushroom circle, I packed my tent and supplies, determined to make one more attempt to find my way out of the forest before nightfall. I still had my map and compass, though the compass continued to spin erratically. The map showed landmarks I should be able to find, distinctive rock formations, streams, ridgelines, but none matched what I saw around me. As I hiked, I noticed changes in the forest. The silence remained, but now there were occasional sounds. Not natural ones, but whispers just at the edge of hearing, snatches of what might have been words in a language I almost recognized. The trees seemed more animated in daylight, branches swaying without wind, trunks creaking as they shifted subtly when I wasn't looking directly at them. Around midday, I stumbled upon something that stopped me cold. A small cabin, weathered gray with age, nestled in a clearing I could have sworn wasn't there moments before. It looked ancient, the logs rotting in places, the stone chimney partially collapsed. With a shock of recognition, I realized what I was looking at: my great-grandfather's cabin. I'd seen a photograph of it once in an old family album. But that was impossible. The cabin should have rotted away completely decades ago, or been demolished for parkland. I approached cautiously, drawn by curiosity and the desperate hope that I might find something inside to help me escape this nightmare. The door hung partially open on rusted hinges, swinging slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. The interior was a single room, dark and musty with decay. Dust covered every surface. A rough-hewn table stood in the center, surrounded by 3 chairs. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold ashes still visible in the hearth. A bed frame, missing its mattress, stood in one corner. But it was the walls that captured my attention. Every available space was covered with carvings, symbols, figures, what appeared to be maps of the forest with markers I didn't understand. Some I recognized as Cherokee symbols, others looked European, Norse perhaps, or Celtic. Many were unfamiliar, abstract patterns that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. On the table lay a leather-bound book, its cover cracked with age but somehow preserved despite the cabin's condition. I approached it slowly, half expecting it to disappear like some cruel mirage, but it remained solid as I picked it up, the leather warm to the touch despite the cabin's chill. The Journal of Benjamin Adams. My great-grandfather's record of his time in these woods, his interactions with whatever lived here. I opened it carefully, the yellowed pages fragile but intact. The early entries were mundane, notes on weather, hunting, the seasonal changes of the forest. But as the journal progressed, the writing became more erratic, filled with references to the voices in the trees and the watchers between the trunks. Benjamin described rituals performed at stone circles hidden deep in the woods, offerings left at the bases of the oldest trees, bargains struck with entities he alternately called the Old Ones and the Slender Folk. He wrote of transformation, of humans who had given themselves to the forest and become something else. Guardians, he called them, or sometimes harvesters. They collected the offering and fed the heart of the forest, some ancient power that slumbered deep beneath the mountains. The final entries were increasingly unhinged, the handwriting degrading into near illegibility. Benjamin wrote about a choice he'd been offered: to become a guardian himself or to establish a bloodline obligation, binding his descendants to provide regular offerings to the forest. He chose the latter, believing it the more merciful option. The last page contained what appeared to be instructions, a ritual to perform if one found themselves chosen by the forest. It involved voluntary bloodletting, specific words to be spoken under the dark of the moon, a willing surrender to whatever power resided in these woods. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. This was why I'd been drawn to this specific part of the forest, why I'd felt compelled to leave the marked trails. The creature, the guardian, had been right. Some part of me had been answering a call I didn't consciously hear. I closed the journal and slipped it into my pack. Whatever happened, I couldn't leave it here for someone else to find. As I turned to leave the cabin, I noticed something carved into the back of the door that I'd missed on entering. A simple message carved decades ago. The forest always collects its due. I backed out of the cabin quickly, suddenly feeling as though the walls were closing in. The clearing around the cabin seemed smaller than when I'd arrived, the surrounding trees having inched closer while I was inside. The sun was already beginning its descent. I had only a few hours of daylight left to find my way out or to prepare for what would come with the dark of the moon. I struck out in what I hoped was the direction of the nearest trail, moving as quickly as I could through the increasingly dense undergrowth. The forest actively worked against me now. Roots rose from the earth to trip me, branches lowered to block my path. Thorny vines appeared where none had been moments before. My progress slowed to a painful crawl as I fought through the vegetation. By late afternoon, I realized the futility of my escape attempt. The forest was too vast, too alive, too determined to keep me. I found a small clearing as the light began to fade and sat on a fallen log, considering my options. I could continue trying to escape, fighting against the forest until exhaustion or injury claimed me. I could wait for the guardian to return and try to fight it, though I knew that would likely end in my death. Or I could read more of my great-grandfather's journal, try to understand what exactly was being asked of me, what this transformation entailed. I chose the third option, opening the journal again as the last light faded from the sky. Using my headlamp, I studied the ritual Benjamin had described, trying to understand what it meant to give oneself to the forest. According to the journal, those who underwent the transformation didn't die, at least not in the conventional sense. Their consciousness merged with the forest itself, becoming part of its awareness. Some, like the guardian I'd met, manifested as semi-independent entities that protected the forest boundaries. Others became part of the trees, the soil, the very fabric of the woods. It was a kind of immortality, but at the cost of humanity. The alternative, resisting, meant death, but a death that would feed the forest for only a short time before it would hunger again, before it would call another descendant of Benjamin Adams to these remote woods. As full darkness descended, I felt the presence of the guardian before I saw it. The sensation of being watched intensified, and the silence deepened until I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Have you decided, Laura Adams?" The voice came from behind me. I turned slowly to face the creature. In the beam of my headlamp, it seemed even more unnatural than before, a being of wood and shadow that only approximated human form. Yet something about it seemed almost familiar now, as though I were looking at a distant relative whose features echoed my own in some subtle way. "I've been reading," I said, holding up the journal. "About my great-grandfather, about what he did." "Benjamin," the guardian said, and I could have sworn I heard something like fondness in its voice. He understood the old ways. He kept the forest fed. "By sacrificing others," I said accusingly. The guardian tilted its head. "By giving the forest what it needed to survive, as humans have always done with the wild places, a relationship of give and take." It gestured around us. "This forest stood when the first humans came to these mountains. It will stand long after your cities have crumbled to dust, but it needs caretakers, needs those who understand its hunger. And if I refuse to be that caretaker, then you will feed it in the only other way possible," the guardian said simply. "And eventually another of your bloodline will be called, perhaps your cousin's child, or their child after them. The forest is patient, but it always collects its due." I thought of my cousin Rebecca, who had a 5-year-old daughter. The thought of that little girl someday facing this same choice because of my refusal sent a chill through me. "What exactly happens if I agree?" I asked. "What does this transformation involve?" "Pain," the guardian admitted. "Brief but intense, then understanding. Your consciousness expands to include every tree, every root, every creature that dwells here. You become part of something ancient and vast." It extended one long-fingered hand. "Let me show you." Against every instinct, I reached out and took its hand. The bark-like skin was warm and pulsed with something like a heartbeat. Instantly, my mind expanded, and I was everywhere at once, seeing through 1,000 different perspectives. I was the trees, feeling sunlight on countless leaves, roots drinking deep from hidden springs. I was the soil, rich with decomposing matter that fed new life. I was the small creatures that burrowed and nested throughout the forest. I was the wind moving through branches, the water flowing in streams. I was ancient, patient, alive in a way humans could never comprehend. And I wasn't alone. Other consciousnesses moved through this vast awareness. Hundreds of them, each distinct yet part of the greater whole. Some I recognized as the guardians, like the one holding my hand. Others were more diffuse, spread throughout the forest itself. Then I was back in my body, gasping, my hand pulling away from the guardians. The experience had lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours had passed. "That's what awaits," the guardian said quietly. "Not death, transcendence." I struggled to process what I'd experienced. It hadn't felt evil or malevolent. Strange and alien, yes, but also somehow right, as though I'd glimpsed some fundamental truth about existence that had always been just beyond my understanding. But it would mean the end of my human life. No return to Chicago, to my friends, my career, my mother waiting for news of my trip. I would disappear, become one of the missing that these mountains occasionally claimed. "I need to think," I said. The guardian nodded. "The moon reaches its darkest point at midnight. Decide by then." It melted back into the shadows, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat motionless for a long time, weighing impossibilities. Transformation or death. Becoming part of this ancient consciousness or fighting against it and ultimately failing, only to pass the burden to another generation of my family. As midnight approached, I made my decision. I took out my knife and opened my great-grandfather's journal to the page describing the ritual. The instructions were simple. Blood freely given at the base of the oldest tree I could find, words spoken in a language I somehow knew how to pronounce, and, finally, a willing surrender to whatever waited between the worlds. I found the tree, an enormous oak that seemed to dwarf all others nearby, its trunk so wide it would take 5 people joining hands to encircle it. Roots spread outward like massive serpents, disappearing into the earth. The canopy above was lost in darkness. The guardian waited there, watching silently as I approached. "I've decided," I said, my voice steady despite my fear. "And?" it prompted. "I'll do it. I'll join the forest." The words felt strange in my mouth, yet somehow right, as if I'd been moving toward this moment my entire life without knowing it. The guardian nodded, satisfaction evident in its glowing eyes. "You've chosen wisely, Laura Adams. The forest will welcome you." Following the journal's instructions, I knelt at the base of the great oak. Using my knife, I cut my palm, deep enough to draw a steady flow of blood but not enough to cause serious harm. The pain was sharp but clarifying. I pressed my bleeding hand against the rough bark of the tree and began to speak the words written in the journal, sounds that should have been impossible for a human throat to produce, yet which came naturally to me, as though some deeper part of me had always known them. As I spoke, the forest around me changed. The silence broke, replaced by low humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The trees began to glow with faint blue light that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. The ground beneath me softened, the roots of the great oak moving like tentacles to encircle my wrists and ankles. Fear spiked through me, a final, desperate animal instinct to flee, but I forced myself to remain still, to accept what was happening. I looked up at the guardian, who watched impassively. "Will it hurt?" I asked, my voice small. "Yes," it answered honestly, "but not for long." The roots tightened their grip, pulling me against the trunk of the oak. The bark softened, becoming almost liquid, beginning to flow around me, enveloping me. I felt it seeping into my skin, flowing into my bloodstream, replacing human tissue with something else, something ancient and patient and vast. The pain was beyond anything I'd experienced, every cell in my body screaming as it was transformed. I might have screamed too, but the sound was lost in the greater chorus of the forest awakening around me. Then, suddenly, the pain was gone. My consciousness expanded outward, connecting with the great web of awareness that was the forest. I could feel every tree, every plant, every creature that dwelled within these woods. I could sense the other transformed humans, their minds touching mine in welcome. My physical form was changing, stretching, becoming something new, neither fully human nor fully tree, but something in between, a guardian like the one who had called me here. I would watch the boundaries, protect the forest, guide the occasional chosen ones who heard the forest's call. As dawn broke over the mountains, a new guardian stood in the clearing. Those who knew Laura Adams would never see her again. Search parties would comb these woods for weeks before giving up. Her backpack and equipment would never be found. She would become another mystery of the Appalachian wilderness, another name on the long list of those who went into the deep woods and never returned. But I remained. I remained still, walking between the trees, watching for those who strayed too deep into the forest, listening for those with the old blood who might hear the calling. These woods are ancient, filled with mysteries beyond human understanding. If you hike in the remote parts of Pisgah Forest and feel a presence watching from between the trees, if the silence grows too deep and the paths seem to shift around you, turn back. Return to the marked trails, to the safety of the campgrounds and visitor centers. Or don't. I'm always listening for new voices to join our chorus. The forest is always hungry, and we guardians are always watching, waiting between the trees. My name was Laura Adams. Now I am the whisper in the leaves, the shadow between trunks, the watcher in the woods, and I am waiting for you. My name is Anthony Wilson. Please, sir, I'm lost. I froze, torn between safety and the instinct to help. The voice was so small, so frightened. "Anthony, come on," Derek shouted from the far bank. I looked back into the forest. At the edge of the tree line stood a small figure, a child of perhaps 6 or 7, dressed in old-fashioned clothes that seemed to belong to the era of the journal writer. "I just need help finding my mama," the child said, taking a step toward me. Something was wrong with its movements, too fluid, too precise for a frightened child, and its face. The longer I looked, the more it seemed like a mask, the features not quite aligned properly. "It's not real," I whispered to myself, backing toward the stream. The child's expression shifted, the face suddenly splitting into a grin that extended far beyond the confines of human anatomy. "But I am hungry," it said, the voice deepening, distorting. I turned and plunged into the stream, slipping on the rocks but catching myself before I fell. The water was shockingly cold, numbing my feet almost instantly. Behind me, an inhuman shriek tore through the air, rage and frustration embodied in sound. I didn't look back, focusing entirely on reaching the opposite bank where my friends waited. As I stumbled out of the water, Derek and Mia pulled me up onto dry land. The world around us seemed to stabilize, the unnatural twilight replaced by genuine afternoon sunlight. We were back in the real Panthertown Valley, standing on a well-maintained trail with normal trees and normal shadows. "We made it," Mia gasped, looking around in disbelief. But Lucas was shaking his head. "Not all of us," he said quietly. We followed his gaze back across the stream. The forest on the other side was wrong, darker, more twisted than it should have been. And at the edge of the water stood not the child I had seen, but the woodwalker in its true form. It was tall and emaciated, its limbs too long and jointed in too many places. Its skin was a patchwork of different textures, some areas resembling tree bark, others glistening wetly like exposed muscle. But most disturbing was its face, or rather, faces. What I had initially taken for a head was actually a cluster of partial human faces fused together in a grotesque collage, eyes blinking independently, mouths opening and closing at random. One of those mouths opened wider than should have been possible, and from it came Lucas's voice, perfect in every detail. "You can't leave me here." The real Lucas beside us flinched, stumbling backward. "No," he moaned. "No, no, no." "It can't cross the water," Derek reminded us, his voice shaking. "We're safe now." But even as he spoke, the creature began to change, its form shifting and flowing like smoke. It shrank, condensed, becoming more human in proportion if not in nature. A face emerged from the churning mass, Lucas's face, but wrong. The eyes too wide, the smile too fixed. "You're safe," it said in Lucas's voice, taking a step into the stream. The water hissed and steamed where it touched the creature's foot, but it did not retreat. "Run," Derek said, already pulling Mia and me away. "Now!" We ran, half dragging Lucas, who seemed on the verge of complete breakdown. The blue-blazed trail led us uphill toward what I hoped was Schoolhouse Falls, and beyond that, civilization. Behind us, I heard splashing, slow, pained, but persistent. The woodwalker was crossing the stream despite the apparent agony it caused. The journal had been wrong, or perhaps the creature had grown stronger since those words were written. We reached a fork in the trail, one path continuing toward the falls, the other leading directly back toward the parking area according to a weathered sign. "This way," Derek said, indicating the path to the parking lot. "It's shorter." But Lucas suddenly pulled away from us, his eyes clear and focused for the first time in hours. "No," he said firmly. "The stone circle, the altar. It's the only way to end this." "Lucas, that's suicide," Mia protested. "You read the journal. It requires a sacrifice." "It already has part of me," Lucas replied, his voice eerily calm. "When I wandered off last night, it touched me. I can feel it in my head, trying to take control. That's why I can wear my face so perfectly now. If we just run, it will follow us out of Panthertown. It will follow us home." I wanted to argue, to insist there must be another way, but the certainty in Lucas's eyes stopped me, and I couldn't deny the logic. If this thing could leave the forest, no one would be safe. "How do we find the stone circle again?" I asked, accepting his decision even as my heart rebelled against it. Lucas pointed toward a barely visible game trail branching off from the main path. "Through there. I can feel it pulling me." Derek looked tortured, torn between the escape so close at hand and the terrible alternative Lucas proposed. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. Lucas nodded. "It has to end here." The splashing behind us grew louder, accompanied by a wet, rasping breathing that no human throat could produce. Our time was running out. With a resigned nod, Derek led us onto the narrow game trail. It wound through denser forest, climbing steeply at times, descending sharply at others. The normal sounds of Panthertown, birdsong, rustling leaves, distant waterfalls, gradually faded, replaced by that unnatural silence we'd experienced before. The boundary between worlds was thinning again. The forest around us began to shift, normal trees giving way to their twisted counterparts. The green twilight returned, washing away the natural sunlight. We had crossed back into the woodwalker's domain. The stone circle appeared ahead of us, exactly as we'd seen it before, the rough ring of standing stones surrounding the altar. But now there was something else, a dark, vertical shimmer in the air above the altar, like heat rising from asphalt, but black as midnight. "The doorway," Lucas whispered. Behind us, the crashing pursuit grew closer. The woodwalker had recovered from crossing the stream and was gaining rapidly. Lucas approached the altar stone, his movements strange and stilted, as if fighting himself every step of the way. "You need to leave," he told us, not turning around. "All of you. Go back to the stream. Cross it. Don't wait for me." "Lucas, we can't just—" Mia began. "Go," he shouted, his voice breaking. "I can't hold it back much longer. It's in my head. It wants me to call you closer." Derek took Mia's arm gently but firmly. "We have to respect his choice," he said quietly. I couldn't leave. Not yet. I approached Lucas, staying just out of reach. "There has to be another way." He turned to look at me and I flinched. His eyes were changing, the pupils elongating into vertical slits. "There isn't," he said, his voice overlaid with a second, deeper tone. "I opened the door, Anthony, in my dreams. It called to me for weeks before we came here. I just didn't understand until it was too late. But the journal said blood freely given." "You didn't know," I argued. A terrible smile spread across Lucas's face, too wide, revealing too many teeth. "Part of me knew. Part of me wanted this." A crashing sound from the forest edge announced the woodwalker's arrival. It burst into the clearing in Lucas's form but immediately began shifting, growing, stretching into its true nightmare shape. "Go!" Lucas screamed, the word barely human anymore. Derek grabbed my arm, pulling me away. "We have to run. Now." This time, I didn't resist. The three of us fled along the game trail, the sounds of inhuman screaming and thrashing filling the forest behind us. The very air seemed to vibrate around us, trees swaying despite the absence of wind. We ran until our lungs burned, following the trail back to the fork and then toward the stream that marked the boundary between worlds. As we neared it, a concussive force knocked us off our feet, an invisible shockwave that flattened smaller trees and sent birds erupting from the canopy in panic. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. We picked ourselves up slowly, looking back the way we had come. The forest had changed again. Normal trees, normal undergrowth, normal afternoon sunlight filtering through the leaves. "Did he do it?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. No one needed to. We could feel the difference in the air, the absence of the malevolence that had stalked us. We crossed the stream anyway, unwilling to take chances, and followed the blue blaze trail back to the parking lot. Our cars sat exactly where we had left them, though it felt like years had passed rather than a single night. As we loaded our remaining gear, the old man in the trucker cap appeared again, leaning against his pickup truck. "You folks have a good camping trip?" he asked, his leathery face unreadable. Derek and Mia couldn't seem to find words. I stepped forward. "We lost someone," I said. The old man nodded slowly. "Forest takes one every few years. Has since before my grandpappy's time. You knew, I said, anger finally breaking through my exhaustion. You knew, and you just gave us some cryptic warning about not answering if something called our names? He looked at me with ancient, knowing eyes. Would you have believed more than that? Would you have turned around if I'd told you the truth? He was right. Of course, we would have laughed it off as local superstition. What was it? I asked. What was that thing, really? The old man shrugged. Got many names over the years. Cherokee called it something that translates to the one who wears the dead. Settlers called it the woodwalker. Some say it came with the first people to these mountains, hiding in their shadows. Others say it was always here, waiting. And the stone circle? The doorway? Older than any history we got. Some things just are. He straightened up, adjusting his cap. Your friend bought you all some time. Might be years before it finds another way through. Might be decades. But doors that have been opened once are easier to open again. He climbed into his truck without another word, driving away and leaving us with the terrible knowledge that somewhere in Panthertown Valley, a doorway waited. Dormant for now, but not forever closed. We gave the police a sanitized version of events. Lucas wandering off during a night of confusion and unexpected fog, us searching but finding no trace. They conducted a proper search, of course, but found nothing. Lucas was eventually declared missing, presumed dead from exposure or a fall from one of Panthertown's many cliffs. We never told anyone the full truth. Who would believe us? Sometimes I convince myself it was all a shared delusion brought on by fear and exhaustion after getting lost. But then I dream of the stone circle, of the woodwalker's many faces, and I know better. I haven't returned to Panthertown Valley. Neither have Derek or Mia. But sometimes when I'm alone in my apartment at night, I think I hear something calling my name from just outside my window, a perfect imitation of Lucas's voice, asking to be let in. And sometimes, in my darker moments, I wonder if part of Lucas is still alive somewhere on the other side of that doorway, wearing a face that isn't quite his own, his voice stolen by the thing that took him. My therapist says these are normal manifestations of survivor's guilt. I don't argue with her, but I keep the blinds drawn at night, and I never, ever answer when something calls my name after dark. And if you go hiking in Panthertown Valley, stick to the marked trails. Don't wander, even if the path seems clear. And if something calls your name when the sun goes down, something that sounds exactly like someone you know and trust, for God's sake, don't answer. Some doors should remain closed. Some voices should remain unheard, and some things should be left alone in the dark places of the world, no matter how convincingly they wear the faces of those we've lost. And I am 32 years old. This happened in Panthertown Valley, North Carolina, deep in the Nantahala National Forest, just last summer. What was supposed to be a weekend of reconnecting with nature turned into something I still struggle to explain. Something that haunts my dreams and makes me question my own sanity. I'd been working at Haywood Technologies in Asheville for nearly 5 years. The software development job paid well, but the constant pressure of deadlines and the fluorescent lights of the office were slowly draining my spirit. My therapist had suggested I try spending more time outdoors to help with my increasing anxiety. Nature is healing, she'd said with that reassuring smile of hers. If only she knew. My co-workers, Derek, Mia, and Lucas, had been talking about a camping trip for months. We were a tight-knit team, spending most of our waking hours together coding and troubleshooting. Derek was our team lead, a natural outdoorsman with a booming laugh and an impressive beard. Mia was our UX designer, quiet but wickedly smart with a dry sense of humor. And Lucas was the newest addition to our team, a brilliant programmer who'd moved from Seattle 6 months ago. Panthertown Valley, Derek had announced during our Friday team meeting. It's called the Yosemite of the East. Waterfalls, streams, granite domes, it's got everything. I'd seen the photos online. Panthertown Valley was breathtaking. 60 miles of trails winding through 6,700 acres of wilderness. The nickname Yosemite of the East seemed fitting with its towering cliffs and pristine waterways. "I'm in," I said without hesitation, surprising even myself. The others looked at me, eyebrows raised. I wasn't exactly known for my outdoor enthusiasm. "About time you saw some sunlight, Anthony," Mia teased. We planned the trip for the following weekend. Derek took charge, creating detailed lists of supplies and mapping our route. We would hike in from the west entrance near Cashiers, camp near Schoolhouse Falls, and spend 2 days exploring before heading back. The drive from Asheville took about 2 hours, winding through the Blue Ridge Mountains. Lucas rode with me, while Derek and Mia followed in Derek's Jeep. Lucas was unusually quiet during the drive. "Everything okay?" I asked, glancing at him as we turned onto NC 107. "Yeah," he said, staring out the window. "Just didn't sleep well last night. Had weird dreams." "Cold feet about sleeping on the ground," I joked. He didn't laugh. "I've been having the same dream for weeks. I'm lost in a forest and something's hunting me. Something that isn't right." I chuckled nervously. "Maybe this weekend wasn't the best timing for you." "No, it's fine," he insisted. "It's just a dream. Besides, I've been looking forward to seeing Panthertown." We arrived at the trailhead around noon. The small gravel parking lot was mostly empty, just a couple of other cars and a weathered pickup truck. As we unloaded our gear, I noticed an old man watching us from beside the wooden trail map. He wore faded overalls and a flannel shirt despite the summer heat, his leathery face deeply lined beneath a worn trucker cap. "Heading into Panthertown?" he called out as Derek consulted his GPS. "Yes, sir," Derek replied with his usual friendliness. "Planning to camp near Schoolhouse Falls." The old man nodded slowly. "Beautiful spot. Just be sure to stay on the marked trails. People have been known to get turned around in there." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "And if you hear something calling your name at night, don't answer." Mia laughed. "Is that an old local legend?" The man didn't smile. "Just some friendly advice. Enjoy your stay." He turned and walked to the pickup truck, driving away without another word. "Well, that was ominous," I muttered, adjusting my backpack straps. Derek grinned. "Every good camping trip needs a cryptic warning from a local. It's tradition." We hit the trail in high spirits, Derek leading the way with his GPS and paper map. The initial path descended through a beautiful mixed hardwood forest, dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy. Despite my usual indoor lifestyle, I felt a surge of energy as we hiked deeper into the valley. The first sign that something was off came about 2 hours in. Derek stopped suddenly, consulting his GPS with a frown. "That's weird," he said, looking up at the trail ahead. "According to this, we should be approaching Little Green Creek, but—" He gestured at the dry forest floor. "Maybe it's seasonal?" Mia suggested. Derek shook his head. "It's a permanent creek, and the trail markers should have us turning west here, but there's no intersection." We all looked around. The trail we were on continued straight ahead with no visible turn. "Let me check the paper map," Derek said, slinging off his pack. As he dug through his bag, I felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. Something about the quality of the silence in the forest struck me as unnatural. No birds, no insects buzzing, just the sound of our breathing and the rustling of Derek's pack. "This doesn't make sense," Derek finally said, looking genuinely confused. "According to both the map and GPS, we're right here." He pointed to a spot on the paper map. "But the landmarks don't match up at all." "Could we have taken a wrong turn earlier?" I asked. "I've been checking the markers religiously," Derek insisted. "We're on the right path, but it's like—" He hesitated. "It's like the landscape doesn't match the map anymore." Lucas had been silent throughout this exchange, staring into the woods to our right. "Let's just keep going," he said suddenly. "I don't like standing still here." "Why not?" Mia asked. Lucas didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was unnaturally flat. "I feel like we're being watched." I looked where he was staring but saw nothing except trees and undergrowth. Yet I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The forest that had seemed so welcoming hours ago now felt oppressive. The trees too close together, the shadows too deep. "Let's try to get to higher ground," Derek suggested. "If we can spot some landmarks, we can reorient ourselves." We continued along the trail, walking faster now. The path began to climb, becoming steeper and less maintained. Strange rock formations appeared along the sides. Flat stones balanced precariously on one another in ways that seemed to defy gravity. "Those can't be natural," Mia said, pausing to photograph one particularly elaborate stack. "Probably other hikers messing around," Derek replied, but he didn't sound convinced. As we climbed higher, the forest changed. The familiar oaks and hickories gave way to twisted pines and gnarled rhododendrons that formed dark tunnels over the path. The air grew colder, and an odd mist began to curl around our ankles despite the afternoon sun. We finally emerged onto a granite dome that should have offered panoramic views of the valley. Instead, we found ourselves enveloped in a thick blanket of fog that had materialized out of nowhere. "This is impossible," Derek said, checking his GPS again. It was clear skies in the forecast all weekend. The fog swirled around us, so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Our voices sounded muffled, as if the mist itself were absorbing the sound waves. "Let's make camp here," Mia suggested, her voice tight with poorly concealed anxiety. "The fog might clear by morning." No one argued. We were all feeling the strain of our increasingly strange situation. We found a relatively flat area on the granite dome and began setting up our tents. The rock beneath us was cold, unnaturally cold for a summer afternoon. As I hammered in a tent stake, I noticed something carved into the stone. A crude symbol resembling a tree with too many branches, or perhaps a hand with too many fingers. It looked old, the lines weathered and faint. "Hey Derek, check this out," I called. He crouched beside me, running his fingers over the carving. "Huh, could be Native American. Cherokee were all through these mountains." "It doesn't look Cherokee to me," Lucas said, joining us. "I did a project on indigenous symbols in college. This is different." The symbol seemed to shimmer slightly in the dim light, but I told myself it was just moisture on the rock catching what little sunlight penetrated the fog. By the time we finished setting up camp, darkness was falling rapidly. We gathered around a small fire that Derek struggled to keep lit. The flames burned with an odd bluish tinge that no one mentioned but we all noticed. "So, tomorrow we backtrack?" Mia asked as she warmed her hands by the strange fire. "Yeah," Derek nodded. "Something's off with my navigation tools. We need to get back to the main trail system." We ate a subdued dinner of dehydrated camping meals. The food tasted wrong somehow, bland and textureless despite the different flavors we'd brought. No one finished their portions. As night fully descended, the fog thickened until it seemed to press against us physically. The firelight created bizarre, shifting shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames. The air felt charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. "Do you hear that?" Lucas suddenly asked, his head tilted to one side. We all fell silent, listening. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, a rhythmic sound in the distance. Thump, 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 thump. Almost like footsteps, but too heavy, too measured. "Probably just a hiker," Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. "At night? In this fog?" Mia whispered. The sound continued, neither approaching nor receding, for several minutes before fading away. "I'm going to check the perimeter," Derek said, reaching for his flashlight. "Don't," Lucas said sharply. "Don't go out there." Derek stared at him. "Why not?" "Just don't," Lucas repeated, his eyes reflecting the bluish flames. "Please." We all looked at Lucas. There was something in his voice, a certainty, a dread, that sent shivers down my spine. "Lucas, what's going on with you?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "The dreams I mentioned? They were about this place. I didn't realize it until we got here, but it's the same forest, the same fog." He looked up, his eyes wide. I've been dreaming about Panthertown Valley for weeks, but I've never been here before." An uncomfortable silence fell over our group. Mia shifted closer to Derek. "It's just a coincidence," Derek finally said. "Forests look similar in dreams. Your brain probably just filled in the details from pictures you saw online." Lucas didn't argue, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Neither was I, if I'm being honest. We decided to turn in early, hoping the morning would bring clear skies and clearer heads. I shared a tent with Lucas while Derek and Mia took the other one. Sleep didn't come easily. The ground beneath our sleeping bags was hard and cold, and strange sounds kept filtering through the tent walls. Cracking branches, rustling undergrowth, and occasionally that rhythmic thumping again, sometimes near, sometimes far. I must have drifted off eventually because I woke suddenly in the middle of the night, disoriented and instantly alert. Something had woken me. A sound, a presence. I turned to check on Lucas and found his sleeping bag empty. "Lucas?" I whispered, sitting up. No response. Maybe he'd just gone to relieve himself. I waited a few minutes, but when he didn't return, a knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. I slipped out of my sleeping bag and put on my shoes, grabbing my flashlight before unzipping the tent as quietly as possible. The fog outside was even thicker than before, glowing faintly under the light of a moon I couldn't see. I swept my flashlight around, the beam barely penetrating the dense mist. "Lucas," I called softly, not wanting to wake Derek and Mia if Lucas was just nearby. The fog seemed to absorb my voice. I took a few hesitant steps away from the tent, trying to decide which direction to search first. That's when I heard it. My name, whispered from somewhere in the mist. Anthony. It wasn't Lucas's voice. It wasn't anyone's voice I recognized. It had a strange, hollow quality, as if coming from the bottom of a well. I remembered the old man's warning at the trailhead. If you hear something calling your name at night, don't answer. I froze, holding my breath. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Anthony. Help me. This time it sounded like Lucas, but wrong somehow. The inflection off, the tone too desperate. "Lucas," I called, louder now, my heart pounding. A rustle in the fog to my left. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, but the beam illuminated only swirling mist. Then another sound to my right, then behind me. I kept turning, trying to pinpoint the source, growing increasingly disoriented. "Derek! Mia!" I shouted, no longer caring about waking them. I needed help. The flap of Derek and Mia's tent unzipped, and Derek emerged, his own flashlight scanning the area. "Anthony, what's going on?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Lucas is gone," I said. "I woke up and he wasn't in the tent." Derek's expression immediately shifted from confusion to concern. "How long?" "I don't know. I woke up maybe 5 minutes ago." Mia joined us, wrapping her jacket tight around herself. "Where would he go in this?" she asked, gesturing at the impenetrable fog. Before I could answer, we heard it. A scream, distant but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in the forest below the granite dome. "Lucas!" Derek shouted, already moving toward the sound. "Wait!" I grabbed his arm. "We can't just run off in the dark. We need a plan." Derek hesitated, clearly torn between taking immediate action and acknowledging the dangers of our situation. "Anthony's right," Mia said. "If we all get separated in this fog, we're screwed." Derek nodded reluctantly. "Okay, we stick together. We'll mark our camp with—" He looked around, then grabbed a roll of bright orange trail marking tape from his pack. "We'll use this to mark our path so we can find our way back." We quickly gathered essential supplies, flashlights, water, first aid kit, knife, and began making our way toward where we'd heard the scream. Derek tied orange tape to branches at regular intervals as we descended from the granite dome into the forest. The fog was slightly less dense under the tree canopy, but the darkness was absolute between the beams of our flashlights. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in the tense silence. We called Lucas's name repeatedly, stopping to listen after each call. There was no response, not from Lucas, not from anything. Even the mysterious thumping had stopped. After what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, Derek paused, looking troubled. "We should have reached the valley floor by now," he said. "We've been descending continuously." I looked back the way we'd come. The orange tape markers were visible on nearby trees, creating a clear path back to camp. At least that was working. "Could the slope be more gradual than it seems?" Mia suggested. Derek shook his head. "No, we should have—" A crack echoed through the forest, the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking under weight. We all swung our flashlights toward the noise. For a split second, my beam caught something moving between the trees about 30 yards away, a tall, thin shape, too tall to be human, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows faster than should have been possible. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "See what?" Derek asked, his flashlight still scanning the area. "There was something there," I insisted. "Something big." "I didn't see anything," Mia said, but her voice was uncertain. I was about to argue when another sound reached us. A low moan, human and pained, much closer than the earlier scream. "That's Lucas," Derek said, already moving toward it. We found him curled at the base of a massive oak tree, shivering violently. His clothes were torn and dirty, his face scratched as if he'd run through brambles. "Lucas!" I knelt beside him, relief washing over me. "What happened? Are you okay?" He looked up at me, his eyes unfocused. "Anthony, is that really you?" "Of course it's me. We've been looking everywhere for you." Lucas grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "It wears faces," he whispered urgently. "It steals voices. Don't trust anything you see or hear." Derek and Mia exchanged concerned glances above us. "Let's get him back to camp," Derek said. "He needs warm clothes and something to drink. He might be hypothermic." With Derek and me supporting Lucas between us, we began retracing our steps, following the orange tape markers. Lucas mumbled incoherently most of the way, occasionally falling silent only to suddenly jerk his head up and stare into the darkness as if seeing something we couldn't. About halfway back to camp, I noticed something odd. "Weren't there more tape markers?" I asked, pointing ahead where the next marker should have been visible. Derek frowned. "Yeah, I put them every 15 feet or so." Yet the next marker was nowhere to be seen. We moved forward cautiously until we found another piece of orange tape, tied to a pine tree that none of us recognized. "This isn't right," Derek said, his voice tight. "This isn't the way we came." "But we've been following the markers," Mia protested. "Someone's been moving them," Lucas said with sudden clarity. "It's playing with us." An icy chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. I turned in a slow circle, studying the forest around us. The trees seemed different, older, more gnarled, with thick, ropey vines hanging from their branches. "We need to get back to the granite dome," Derek said, trying to keep his voice steady. "From there, we can reorient ourselves when the sun comes up." "If it comes up," Lucas muttered. We ignored that comment and began climbing what we hoped was the way back to our camp. The slope was steeper than I remembered, the ground rockier. Strange mushrooms grew in clusters along the path, glowing faintly with bioluminescence, providing just enough light to see when passing between the beams of our flashlights. The fog began to thin as we climbed, which I initially took as a good sign. But as it cleared, I realized we were in a part of the forest I didn't recognize at all. Massive boulders loomed on either side of the path, creating a natural corridor that seemed to funnel us in one direction. "Derek," I said quietly, "I don't think this is the way back to camp." He nodded grimly. "I know, but we need to keep moving. Standing still feels dangerous." I couldn't argue with that. There was a palpable sense of malevolence in the air, a feeling of being herded, watched, hunted. The path between the boulders widened suddenly, opening into a small clearing. In the center stood a crude stone structure, a rough circle of standing stones surrounding a larger flat stone that resembled an altar. We all stopped, staring at the arrangement. It looked ancient, the stones weathered and covered in lichen, yet there was something distinctly wrong about it. The angles seemed to shift when viewed from different perspectives, creating an optical illusion that made my head hurt. "We should go around," Mia whispered. But as we skirted the edge of the clearing, giving the stone circle a wide berth, Lucas suddenly broke away from us, stumbling toward the center. "Lucas!" I shouted, lunging after him. He reached the altar stone before I could stop him, collapsing against it, his hands splayed across its surface. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw something dark and viscous on the stone, something that glistened wetly and was far too fresh to be part of the ancient structure. I grabbed Lucas's arm, pulling him back. "We need to go. Now." He turned to me, his eyes wide and strange. "Don't you hear it? The singing." I heard nothing except the blood pounding in my ears and the harsh breathing of our group. "There's no singing, Lucas," Derek said firmly, helping me pull him away from the altar. "Come on." As we retreated from the clearing, dragging a reluctant Lucas with us, I glanced back one last time. In the shadows beyond the stone circle, something moved. A tall, emaciated figure with too many limbs, its head cocked at an impossible angle as it watched us leave. I said nothing to the others, focusing instead on putting as much distance between us and that clearing as possible. We walked for what felt like hours, following no path but our own desperate need to escape. The forest grew denser, the trees pressing closer, branches reaching toward us like grasping fingers. Our flashlight beams began to weaken, the batteries draining at an alarming rate. "We need to stop," Mia finally said, her voice ragged with exhaustion. "Just for a little while." Derek checked his watch and frowned. "It's 4:30 a.m. Dawn should be coming soon." We found a relatively open spot and sat in a tight circle, backs together so we could watch all directions. Lucas had fallen into a state of near catatonia, responding only with nods or shakes of his head when directly addressed. "What do we do when the sun comes up?" Mia asked quietly. "We find the highest point we can," Derek replied. "Get our bearings. There's got to be a ranger station or a road somewhere within a day's hike." I wasn't so sure. Nothing about this forest felt connected to the normal world anymore. The Panthertown Valley we'd entered yesterday seemed very far away. As if reading my thoughts, Mia asked, "Do you think we're still in Panthertown?" Before anyone could answer, Lucas spoke up, his voice eerily calm. "We haven't been in Panthertown since yesterday afternoon. Not the real Panthertown, anyway." "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. In my dreams, there was always a moment when everything shifted, when the forest became something else. I think it happened when we got lost, when the trail didn't match the map anymore. He looked up at the canopy above us. "This place just looks like Panthertown. It's wearing it like a skin." A heavy silence fell over our group. What could we say to that? It was crazy, impossible, yet it matched the growing dread I'd been feeling, the sense that we'd wandered into something ancient and malevolent that merely disguised itself as a forest. "Dawn's coming," Derek finally said, nodding toward the east where the sky was imperceptibly lightening. But as the darkness slowly receded, what replaced it wasn't the clear light of morning. Instead, a sickly green glow suffused the forest, filtering through the canopy like sunlight through pond water. The fog returned, not as thick as before, but drifting in tendrils between the trees, carrying an acrid smell of decay. In this strange half-light, the forest revealed itself in new, disturbing ways. The trees weren't just trees anymore. Their bark was textured with patterns that looked unsettlingly like faces frozen in expressions of agony. The ground beneath us wasn't covered in normal forest detritus, but in what appeared to be small bones and teeth partially buried in the soil. "Oh God," Mia whispered, staring at the ground in horror. "Don't look," Derek said, standing quickly. We need to move." We helped Lucas to his feet and began walking again, trying to maintain an easterly direction though the forest seemed to twist around us, landscapes repeating in impossible ways. More than once, I was certain we passed the same distinctive tree or rock formation, despite walking in what should have been a straight line. The green light never brightened into proper daylight. If anything, it seemed to be dimming again, the forest preparing to plunge us back into darkness. "There!" Derek suddenly exclaimed, pointing ahead. "I see something." Through the trees, a structure was visible. Wooden walls, a slanted roof, a cabin. Hope surged through me until I realized what we were seeing. It wasn't just any cabin. It was oddly familiar. "That's McKinney Cabin," I said slowly, "from the Trailhead Information Board. But that's miles from where we were camping." McKinney Cabin was a historic structure near the east entrance of Panthertown Valley, a preserved relic from early settlers in the area. We had planned to hike past it on our final day. "Maybe we've been walking in the right direction after all," Mia suggested hopefully, but something felt wrong. The cabin looked older, more decrepit than the restored historic site shown on the information board. The roof sagged dangerously, and the walls were darkened with rot. As we approached cautiously, the wrongness only intensified. Symbols were carved into the wooden door, the same strange tree-like or many-fingered hand design I'd seen on the granite dome. "We shouldn't go in there," Lucas said, the first complete sentence he'd spoken in hours. Derek sighed heavily. "We need shelter, Lucas. And if this is really McKinney Cabin, there might be a trail marker nearby, something to help us navigate." Before anyone could argue further, the sky darkened dramatically, as if a switch had been flipped. The green glow vanished, replaced by an unnatural twilight. With it came a sound we'd heard before, that rhythmic thumping, but louder now, closer, shaking the ground beneath our feet. "Inside," Derek ordered, pushing open the cabin door without further hesitation. The interior was a single room, dusty and abandoned. Ancient furniture lay broken in corners and rusted tools hung on the walls. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, filled with ashes that looked disturbingly fresh. Derek quickly closed and barred the door behind us. "Look for anything useful," he instructed, his voice tight with controlled fear. Maps, compasses, weapons. We spread out, searching the cabin by the weakening beams of our flashlights. I moved toward a small table near the fireplace where yellowed papers were scattered across the surface. They were handwritten journal entries, the ink faded but still legible. I picked up the top page, dated October 1891. "Something follows me through the trees," it read. At first, I thought it was a bear, or perhaps one of the mountain lions the locals fear. But no animal moves as this thing does, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4, sometimes crawling along the branches overhead like a massive spider. The sheriff's men won't come this far into Panthertown. They say these woods belong to something they call the Woodwalker. A superstition, I told myself. I no longer believe that. My hands trembled as I picked up the next page. It wears the faces of those it takes. Yesterday, I saw William coming through the clearing. William, who disappeared 3 days ago while checking the traps. I called out to him, overjoyed, until he turned. His face hung loosely like a poorly fitted mask. Behind the eyes was nothing human. The thumping outside grew louder, the entire cabin now vibrating with each impact. Dust rained down from the rafters. "Guys," I said, my voice barely audible over the noise, "we need to read this." Mia and Derek joined me at the table while Lucas huddled in a corner, rocking slightly. "The symbols keep it at bay," the next entry read. Old Cherokee markings, though, when I showed them to the Cherokee man who trades at the settlement, he backed away, crossing himself like a Christian. "Those are not ours," he told me. "Those are much older, from before. I have carved them above every door and window. It watches, but cannot enter." Derek looked up at the doorframe. Sure enough, there was the symbol, the many-branched tree or many-fingered hand, carved deeply into the wood above the door. The thumping stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse, filled with anticipation. Then came a voice from outside, a perfect imitation of Lucas's voice from earlier that night. "Anthony, is that really you?" My blood ran cold. I looked at Lucas, who was still in the corner, his eyes wide with terror. "It wears faces," he whispered. "It steals voices." Another voice called out, this one sounding exactly like Mia. "Derek, I'm hurt. Please help me." Derek's gaze snapped to Mia beside him, his face pale with shock. "Don't listen," I said urgently. "It's trying to lure us out." More voices joined the chorus. People I didn't know, calling out in tones of increasing desperation. Then, most terribly, my mother's voice, exactly as I remembered it from childhood when she would call me in from playing. "Anthony, honey, come out now. It's time to come home." I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices seemed to bypass them, resonating directly in my skull. "The journal," Derek said, grabbing my arm. "What else does it say?" With shaking hands, I turned to the final pages. "It cannot be killed," the entry began. "I tried. God help me, I tried. Bullets pass through it like smoke. Fire seems to paint it but does not consume it. It retreats from running water. This is the only sure defense I have found." My mind raced. "Schoolhouse Falls," I said suddenly. "If we can reach the waterfall—" A tremendous crash interrupted me as something slammed against the cabin wall. Wood splintered. The entire structure groaned under the impact. "It's breaking in," Mia gasped. Another crash, this time against the roof. Rotted shingles gave way, and a long, spindly limb, too thin to support the weight it seemed capable of bearing, reached through the opening. It wasn't quite an arm, wasn't quite a branch, its surface glistening wetly in the beam of Derek's flashlight. Lucas screamed, the sound shocking after his prolonged silence. "It's here! The woodwalker is here!" "The back wall!" Derek shouted, pointing to where weathered boards had partially collapsed. "We can break through there!" We didn't need to be told twice. Derek and I threw ourselves against the weakened wall while Mia pulled Lucas to his feet. The wood gave way easily. Too easily, as if the cabin itself was surrendering to the inevitable. We burst into the forest, running blindly away from the cabin. The otherworldly twilight made navigation nearly impossible, but Derek had grabbed the journal before we fled, and now he pulled it from his pocket as we paused to catch our breath. "Last page," he panted, turning to the final entry. "The stone circle is a doorway," it read. "That much I have gathered from the old stories. What comes through can be sent back, but the price is blood freely given upon the altar stone. I go there tonight to end this, though I fear I will not return. If you read this and the woodwalker still walks, know that my sacrifice failed. Know that only one who enters willingly, with full knowledge of what they do, can close the door." We stood in stunned silence, processing the implications. "The altar," Mia whispered. "The one we found earlier." A series of crashes echoed through the forest, the cabin being torn apart in rage or hunger. "It's coming," Lucas moaned. "We need to find water," I insisted. "The journal said it can't cross running water." Derek nodded grimly. "Schoolhouse Falls can't be far if we really are near McKinney Cabin. Listen for running water." We moved as quickly and quietly as possible through the forest, straining our ears for the sound of a stream or waterfall. The thumping had resumed, sometimes near, sometimes far, as if the woodwalker was circling, hurting us. "There," Mia suddenly said, pointing ahead. "I see light." A faint, natural glow was visible between the trees. The first normal light we'd seen since entering this twisted version of Panther Town. We moved toward it hopefully, and the sound of rushing water grew stronger. We emerged from the forest onto the banks of a fast-flowing stream. Beyond it, illuminated by what appeared to be genuine sunlight, was a familiar sight. The actual trail leading to Schoolhouse Falls, marked with the standard blue blazes of Panthertown Valley trails. "That's it," Derek said, his voice choked with emotion. That's the real Panther Town. We just need to cross the stream." The water was only about 15 feet across, but flowing rapidly over a rocky bed. We would need to be careful not to slip. "I'll go first," Derek said. "Test how deep it is." He stepped into the stream. My name is Jason Adams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Lynville Gorge wilderness of North Carolina just 3 months ago, though the memories feel both impossibly fresh and somehow distant, like they belong to someone else entirely. I've always been what people call a city guy. Born and raised in Charlotte, my idea of outdoor adventure was always a well-maintained park trail with a coffee shop at the end. But after my divorce from Karen last year, a brutal process that left me hollow and questioning everything, I decided I needed something radical to recenter myself. My therapist suggested embracing discomfort as a pathway to growth. So when my coworker Ethan Reed suggested a 4-day backpacking trip into Lynville Gorge, known as the Grand Canyon of the East, I surprised us both by saying yes. Ethan was the opposite of me. Rugged, confident in the outdoors, and seemingly at home anywhere with trees and dirt. We weren't close friends exactly, more work acquaintances who occasionally grabbed beers after particularly grueling days at the architectural firm. But he'd mentioned wanting to hike the gorge for years, and I think he saw in my post-divorce emptiness an opportunity to finally have a companion for the journey. "You'll love it," he assured me as we drove the winding mountain roads toward the trailhead on a crisp October morning. The fall colors were at their peak, splashing the mountainsides with fiery oranges and deep reds. The gorge will change you, man. That's what wild places do. I nodded, already regretting my decision as I gazed down at the dizzying drops from the narrow mountain road. Heights had always made my stomach lurch, a fact I'd conveniently forgotten until now. "There's something special about Lynville," Ethan continued, either not noticing or politely ignoring my white-knuckled grip on the door handle. "The Cherokee called it the place where the spirits dwell. Some of the old-timers in the nearby town still won't go in after dark." I forced a laugh. "Good thing we're not superstitious." Ethan's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, good thing." We reached the Table Rock parking area around noon. The lot was nearly empty except for 2 other vehicles, unusual for a weekend in peak leaf season, but I figured most tourists preferred the easily accessible overlooks to the challenging trails. As we shouldered our packs, a park ranger approached us. She was a weathered woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that assessed us quickly. "Heading into the gorge?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied cheerfully. "Planning to do the Lynville River Trail and loop back up through the Chimney Gap area." She nodded slowly. "You boys aware of the search operation?" "Search operation?" I asked, something cold settling in my stomach. "Young woman went missing 3 days ago. Solo hiker, experienced. Left her itinerary with family, was supposed to check in daily by satellite phone. Missed 2 check-ins now." The ranger's face was carefully neutral. Rangers and search and rescue are combing the eastern ridges, but the gorge is nearly 12,000 acres of wilderness. "Is the trail closed?" Ethan asked, and I silently prayed for an affirmative answer. "No, but we're advising caution. Stay on marked trails, camp in designated areas, and check in at the ranger station when you exit." She handed us each a map with contact information scribbled on the back. "And if you see anything unusual, anything at all, you call this number immediately." The word unusual hung in the air between us. "What happened to her?" I asked. The ranger's eyes flicked away momentarily. "We don't know yet. Her campsite was found intact yesterday. No signs of animal disturbance or struggle. Just empty." After she left, I turned to Ethan. "Maybe this isn't the best weekend." "It's fine," he cut me off. "People get turned around in wilderness areas all the time. She probably took a wrong turn and is making her way out on a different trail." I wasn't convinced, but I also didn't want to seem like a coward. So I adjusted my pack straps and followed Ethan toward the trailhead, where a wooden sign marked the beginning of our descent into Lynville Gorge. The first few hours were actually pleasant. The trail descended gradually, winding through forests of ancient hardwoods and towering hemlocks. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves. Ethan pointed out various plants and bird calls, clearly in his element. By late afternoon, we'd reached the gorge floor where the Lynville River rushed over boulders, its surface glinting in shafts of golden light filtering through the canopy. We found a flat area near the river to make camp, about a quarter-mile from one of the designated camping zones that was already occupied by what looked like a group of college students. Not exactly wilderness solitude with neighbors so close, Ethan grumbled, but probably smart to have people nearby your first time out. I was secretly relieved. After the ranger's warning, having other hikers within shouting distance seemed prudent. As dusk approached, we gathered firewood, and Ethan showed me how to build a proper campfire. The flames cast dancing shadows across our small clearing as we heated our dehydrated meals and sipped whiskey from Ethan's flask. "So, what really brought you out here?" Ethan asked as night settled fully around us. "I mean, no offense, but you've turned down every hiking invitation for the 3 years we've worked together." I stared into the fire, considering my answer. After Karen left, I realized I'd built my entire identity around being half of something, being her husband. When that ended, I didn't know who I was anymore. The whiskey was making me more honest than I'd intended. I guess I'm trying to figure out who Jason Adams actually is when everything familiar's stripped away. Ethan nodded slowly. The wilderness is good for that. Strips you down to essentials. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward toward the stars. Just be careful what you find. Before I could ask what he meant, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the night air. We both jumped to our feet, hearts pounding. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, my voice embarrassingly shaky. Ethan relaxed slightly. "Probably just a mountain lion. They can sound almost human sometimes." "That didn't sound like an animal," I insisted. "In these mountains it's hard to tell the difference sometimes," he replied cryptically. But I noticed he stayed standing, eyes scanning the darkness beyond our firelight. We heard voices from the nearby camp, confirming I wasn't the only one disturbed by the sound. After a few tense minutes with no further screams, we settled back down, but the easy camaraderie of earlier had evaporated. "I'm going to turn in," Ethan finally said, finishing his whiskey in one swallow. "Big day tomorrow if we want to reach the falls." Inside my tent, I found it impossible to sleep. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves jolted me fully awake. The walls of the tent suddenly seemed absurdly thin and vulnerable. I could hear Ethan's steady breathing from his nearby tent, somehow able to sleep soundly despite the earlier disturbance. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke with a start to absolute silence. The kind of unnatural quiet that feels like a held breath. Even the river seemed muted. I checked my watch. 3:17 a.m. The witching hour, my grandmother would have called it. Something made me unzip my tent and peer outside. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting just enough light to make out vague shapes. The air felt dense, like the moments before a thunderstorm, though the sky above showed clear, brilliant stars. That's when I noticed someone standing at the edge of our campsite. A figure, motionless and dark against the trees, too far from the embers to make out clearly, but unmistakably human-shaped and watching our camp. My heart jackhammered against my ribs as I tried to convince myself it was just a tree or large bush I was misinterpreting in the low light. But then it moved, just slightly, a head tilt perhaps, but definitely movement. "Hello?" I called, my voice embarrassingly thin. "Is someone there?" No response, but I swear the figure straightened, now clearly attentive to me. "Ethan," I hissed toward his tent. "Ethan, wake up." Nothing from his tent either. I fumbled for my headlamp, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. When I finally clicked it on and directed the beam toward where the figure had been standing, there was nothing there, just trees and undergrowth. I played the light around our campsite, the narrow beam slicing through darkness but revealing nothing unusual. Ethan's tent was zipped up tight. "Ethan," I called again, louder this time. Still no response. Fighting every instinct screaming at me to stay put, I crawled out of my tent and approached his, the silence pressed against my ears like cotton wool. "Ethan?" I reached for his tent zipper, then hesitated, suddenly afraid of what I might find. Drawing a deep breath, I unzipped the tent door in one quick motion and shone my light inside. Empty. The sleeping bag was rumpled but vacant. No sign of Ethan. "Ethan!" I called out, no longer caring about disturbing anyone. My voice echoed briefly before the forest swallowed it. I turned in a full circle, sweeping my headlamp across our campsite and into the surrounding trees. Nothing moved except the shadows cast by my light. The neighboring camp. They would help. I stumbled in their direction, tripping over exposed roots in my panic. But when I reached their site, I found 4 empty tents. No people, no sounds. Just gear left behind as if the occupants had all simultaneously vanished. My chest constricted with fear so intense it was almost paralyzing. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. I needed to get out, to find the ranger station to get help. I turned to rush back to our camp to grab my phone, and froze. Standing between me and our campsite was a woman. She was maybe 30, with long dark hair and pale skin that seemed to absorb rather than reflect my headlamp's beam. She wore hiking clothes that looked oddly dry and clean compared to the muddy, dew-dampened state of my own. "Hello?" My voice cracked. Are you the missing hiker?" Her head tilted at an unnatural angle, almost bird-like. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried clearly. "Are you lost?" she asked. "I'm looking for my friend," I managed to reply. "He was here, but now—" "People get lost in these woods all the time," she interrupted, taking a step toward me. Something about her movement was wrong. Too fluid, as if she were gliding rather than walking. They wander away from the trails, away from safety. I took an instinctive step back. "Did you see a man? Tall, beard, red jacket?" She smiled, revealing teeth that looked too sharp in the harsh beam of my headlamp. "I see everyone who enters the gorge. It's my home now." A chill that had nothing to do with the October night crawled up my spine. "Your home? The ranger said you were missing." Her smile widened impossibly. "Missing is a matter of perspective, isn't it? I'm exactly where I belong." My heart thrummed painfully against my ribs. "Where is Ethan? Where are the people from the other camp?" "Joining me," she said simply. "As you will." She took another step forward, and I noticed for the first time that her feet didn't quite touch the ground. An inch or two of empty space separated her boots from the forest floor. I ran. Blind panic erased all thought of trails or direction. I just needed to get away from her, from the empty tents, from the unnatural silence that blanketed the gorge. My headlamp bounced wildly, creating a chaotic strobe effect that made the trees seem to leap and sway around me. Branches whipped at my face and arms, but I barely felt them. I don't know how long I ran before my foot caught on an exposed root, sending me sprawling face first onto the forest floor. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs and sent my headlamp flying into the underbrush, where it flickered and died. Complete darkness engulfed me. I lay gasping, tasting blood where I'd bitten my tongue, every muscle quivering with exertion and terror. As my breathing gradually slowed, I became aware of sounds returning to the forest. Normal sounds. The rush of the river, the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze, the distant hoot of an owl. The oppressive silence had lifted. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I pushed myself to my knees, then to my feet. My headlamp was gone, but the night sky had lightened almost imperceptibly with the first hint of approaching dawn. I stood still, trying to orient myself, The river sound came from my right, which meant I had run roughly parallel to it. Our campsite had been near the river, so if I followed the sound back downstream, I should eventually find it again. Moving carefully now, I picked my way through the forest. The first birds had begun their morning songs, and somehow their ordinariness was profoundly comforting. The growing light revealed a landscape that looked entirely normal, just woods and rocks and the occasional glimpse of the river. No floating women with two sharp teeth, no eerie silence, just a wilderness waking up. I was beginning to think I had imagined everything, a nightmare triggered by anxiety and the ranger's warnings, when I stumbled back into our campsite and found Ethan sitting by a freshly built fire, calmly sipping from a metal camp mug. "There you are," he exclaimed, looking up with obvious relief. "I've been worried sick. Where the hell did you go?" I stared at him, unable to process his casual presence after the night's horrors. "Me? You disappeared. I woke up and you were gone." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? I got up to take a leak around dawn and you were gone. Tent empty, no note, nothing. I was about to go get the ranger." "That's not possible. I woke up at 3 a.m. and you were already gone, and there was a woman." I stopped, suddenly uncertain about sharing the most inexplicable part of my experience. "A woman?" Ethan prompted, his expression unreadable. I sank down beside the fire, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. "I think the missing hiker. But something was wrong with her. She didn't touch the ground when she walked, and she said people were joining her, and that I would too." I expected Ethan to laugh, to tell me I'd had a nightmare. Instead, he was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Did she tell you her name?" he finally asked, his voice unnaturally quiet. A cold weight settled in my stomach. "No." "Why?" Ethan reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a missing person flyer. He handed it to me without a word. The woman's face smiled up at me from the photograph. The same woman I'd seen in the night, but in the picture she looked normal, happy, alive. "Sarah Rodriguez," I read aloud, the name feeling strange in my mouth. "Missing since October 12th. "That was 2 years ago," Ethan said softly. I looked up sharply. "What? The ranger said she went missing 3 days ago." Ethan shook his head. "You must have misheard. Sarah Rodriguez vanished in Lynville Gorge 2 years ago. They never found her." He hesitated. "There's been a new disappearance, though. College student named Michael Williams. His friends reported him missing yesterday when he wandered away from their campsite and never returned." "The other camp," I whispered. "It was empty last night. Everyone was gone." Ethan's eyes widened. "What other camp? We're the only ones at this site." "No, there was a group camping nearby. You pointed them out yesterday when we arrived." A look of genuine confusion crossed his face. "Jason, there's been no one else here since we arrived. It's why I chose this spot, for the solitude." My mind reeled. Had I imagined the other camp? The college students? The woman, Sarah, with her feet hovering above the ground? "We need to leave," I said abruptly, standing up. "Now. Something is wrong here." Ethan didn't argue. We packed up quickly, barely speaking. The cheerful morning sunlight felt like a cruel joke after the night's events, but I wasn't taking any chances by staying longer. As we shouldered our packs to leave, I noticed something half buried in the dirt near where my tent had been. Bending down, I picked up a small object and felt my blood turn to ice. It was a satellite phone, cracked and dirty. Inscribed on the back was a name, Sarah Rodriguez. I showed it wordlessly to Ethan, whose face drained of color. "Put it down," he whispered urgently. "Jason, put it down now." But it was too late. The device in my hand suddenly felt warm, then hot. I tried to drop it but found my fingers wouldn't respond. The heat spread up my arm, not burning but paralyzing. And then I heard her voice, not in my ears, but somehow inside my head. "I told you you'd be joining me, Jason Adams." The world tilted sideways. Ethan's face blurred before me, his mouth moving but no sound reaching me. I felt myself falling, but the sensation was distant, unimportant. The forest around me darkened despite the morning sun, shadows stretching and deepening into impossible shapes. And in those shadows, I saw faces, dozens of them, pale and watching with hungry eyes. Sarah Rodriguez was at the front, her too wide smile revealing those sharp, predatory teeth. Behind her stood a young man I somehow knew was Michael Williams, and behind him, others, so many others, stretching back into darkness that seemed to have no end. As consciousness slipped away, I understood with perfect clarity what the ranger had meant by unusual, why the Cherokee called this place where the spirits dwell, why locals wouldn't enter after dark. Lynville Gorge doesn't just claim hikers who get lost or make mistakes, it hungers for them. And now it had claimed me. I woke up in Carolina's medical center 3 days later. The doctors called it severe dehydration combined with panic-induced hallucinations. They found me wandering along the Blue Ridge Parkway, miles from where Ethan and I had been camping, mumbling about floating women and hungry shadows. Ethan corroborated the dehydration theory, telling authorities I'd gotten separated from him during our hike and must have been wandering lost for hours before being found. He visited me in the hospital once, looking uncomfortable and making small talk that carefully avoided any mention of what had actually happened in the gorge. He hasn't returned my calls since I was discharged. Sometimes I almost convinced myself it was all hallucination and trauma. The woman, the empty tents, the satellite phone that burned with cold fire, just my mind fracturing under stress and isolation. But then I catch glimpses from the corner of my eye. A woman with long dark hair watching me from across a crowded street. A young man whose feet don't quite touch the ground in the grocery store. Faces in windows and shadows that disappear when I turn to look directly at them. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of night, I hear Sarah Rodriguez whispering that I didn't really escape, that part of me is still in Lynville Gorge, will always be in Lynville Gorge, joining the ever-growing collection of lost souls trapped in that ancient wilderness. My therapist says these are classic symptoms of PTSD, and I'm trying to believe her. I've moved from Charlotte to Raleigh, changed jobs, changed my phone number. I avoid anything to do with hiking or camping or the outdoors in general. But it doesn't matter. Distance doesn't help, because the worst part, the thing I can't tell anyone, is that sometimes I feel the pull, a yearning to return to the gorge, to walk among the ancient trees and find the others who are waiting for me there, to finally stop running from what I've become. Sarah was right. I did join them in a way. And one day, when the pull becomes too strong to resist, I'll return to Lynville Gorge. I'll walk into those deep woods where the spirits dwell, and I'll never walk out again. My name is Laura Adams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the summer of 2024, during what was supposed to be a refreshing hiking trip in Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina. I had just finalized my divorce after 8 years of marriage and needed to clear my head, to remember who I was before everything fell apart. I've always loved hiking, but city life and a demanding career in marketing had kept me away from the trails for too long. When my therapist suggested I reconnect with activities that once brought me joy, I immediately thought of the mountains. The divorce had left me feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out everything that made me, and filled the space with doubt and anxiety. I needed to prove to myself that I could still function alone, that I could navigate both the wilderness and my new solitary life. I chose Pisgah because of its remoteness. The less people, the better. I didn't want sympathetic looks or awkward conversations, just me, the trees, and the silence. I'd read about a secluded trail near Devil's Courthouse that wasn't well marked on tourist maps, perfect for avoiding the weekend crowds. The drive from Charlotte took about 3 hours. I watched as buildings gave way to rolling hills and eventually the majestic Blue Ridge Mountains. With each mile, I felt the weight on my chest lighten slightly. I rolled down the windows and let the crisp mountain air fill my lungs. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe properly. I reached the small parking area near the trailhead around noon. Only 2 other cars were there, a good sign. I double-checked my backpack. Tent, sleeping bag, water purifier, freeze-dried meals, first aid kit, map, compass, pocket knife, headlamp, extra clothes, and a small flask of whiskey, my one concession to comfort. 6 days of supplies for a 5-day hike, 1 extra day just in case. As I shouldered my pack, I noticed an old wooden sign partially hidden by overgrowth. The Hollows Trail, not maintained, enter at own risk. Perfect. The less maintained, the fewer people. I took a deep breath, adjusted my pack straps, and stepped onto the path. The first few hours were exactly what I needed. The trail wound through dense forest, occasionally opening to reveal breathtaking views of the surrounding mountains. The physical exertion felt good, pushing thoughts of failed marriage and uncertain future to the background. There was only the rhythm of my boots on the trail, the sound of birds, and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. Around 4 in the afternoon, I came across a small clearing perfect for setting up camp. A nearby stream provided water, and fallen logs offered natural seating. I efficiently set up my tent, gathered water, and prepared an early dinner. As I ate my rehydrated pasta, I watched the sunlight filter through the canopy above, creating dancing patterns on the forest floor. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. That first night was uneventful. I read a few chapters of my book by headlamp before falling into a dreamless sleep, lulled by the gentle sounds of the forest. I woke at dawn, refreshed and eager to continue my journey deeper into Pisgah. The second day took me through increasingly rugged terrain. The trail became less defined, requiring me to check my map and compass more frequently. By midday, I reached a landmark I had been looking for, Shining Rock, a massive white quartz outcropping that gleamed in the sunlight. I stopped for lunch, savoring a protein bar while taking in the spectacular view of the Blue Ridge Parkway winding like a ribbon in the distance. It was during my descent from Shining Rock that I first noticed something odd. The forest had gone quiet. No birds calling, no insects buzzing, just an oppressive silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I told myself it was nothing, probably just a hawk or other predator nearby that had scared the smaller creatures into silence. Natural forest dynamics, nothing more. But the silence persisted as I hiked deeper into what my map labeled as the Hollows. The trees here seemed different. Older, twisted in ways that didn't look natural. Moss hung from branches like tattered curtains, and the ground beneath my boots felt spongy and unstable. Several times I had to backtrack when the trail disappeared altogether, checking my compass to ensure I was still heading in the right direction. By late afternoon, I began to worry about finding a suitable campsite. The terrain had become increasingly difficult, with steep ravines and dense undergrowth blocking many potential spots. Just as I was considering backtracking to a small clearing I'd passed an hour earlier, I spotted what looked like a man-made structure through the trees. Curious, I pushed through a thicket of rhododendron to find a small, dilapidated cabin. It looked ancient, the logs weathered to a silvery gray and the roof partially collapsed. Under normal circumstances, I would never consider staying in an abandoned structure, but something about this place called to me. Perhaps it was the threatening sky overhead, dark clouds gathering and promising rain, or maybe it was simple curiosity. I approached cautiously, calling out a hello that echoed unanswered. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, and I pushed it open with the tip of my trekking pole. The interior was a single room with a stone fireplace, a crude wooden table, and what might have once been a bed frame. Now, just a pile of rotted wood. Surprisingly, the roof was intact over most of the space, and the floor seemed solid enough. Against my better judgment, I decided to make camp inside. The rain that had been threatening all afternoon began to fall as I unpacked my sleeping bag and cooking gear. I felt an odd sense of gratitude toward the unknown builder of this shelter as thunder rumbled in the distance. Setting up a tent in a thunderstorm would have been miserable. After a simple dinner, I sat on my sleeping bag listening to the rain drumming on the roof and occasionally illuminating the cabin with flashes of lightning. It was during one such flash that I noticed the carvings on the walls, crude symbols and words scratched into the wood. Most were too faded to make out, but one phrase repeated several times was clearly visible. "She comes at night." I laughed nervously, telling myself it was probably just the work of teenagers or other hikers trying to scare people. Still, I found myself reaching for my pocket knife, keeping it close as I settled into my sleeping bag. Just a precaution, I told myself. The storm, the isolation, and the strange carvings had put me on edge. Nothing more. Sleep came reluctantly, fitful and filled with strange dreams. I saw myself wandering through the forest, following a woman in a tattered dress who always remained just out of clear sight. She moved in an unnatural way, her limbs too fluid, her feet never quite touching the ground. And she was singing, a soft, eerie melody that seemed to seep into my bones. I woke with a gasp, heart pounding. The cabin was pitch black, the storm having passed but clouds still obscuring any moonlight. And there was a smell, musty and organic, like wet soil and rotting vegetation. I fumbled for my headlamp, clicking it on with shaking fingers. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the cabin, and the muddy footprints that led from the door to where I lay. Small, barefoot prints that couldn't possibly be mine. I scrambled backward until my spine pressed against the rough wall, knife clutched in my trembling hand. "Who's there?" I called, my voice embarrassingly thin and frightened. No answer came, but as I swept my light around the room, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A small, crude doll made of twisted sticks and what looked like human hair, placed on the table. My breath caught in my throat. Someone had been in the cabin while I slept. Someone had stood over me, close enough to touch. I should have left immediately, packed up and hiked out in the dark if necessary. That would have been the smart thing to do. Instead, I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe I had sleepwalked and made the footprints myself. Maybe the doll had been there all along, and I simply hadn't noticed it. The alternative, that someone or something had entered while I slept, was too terrifying to accept. I stayed awake the rest of the night, knife in hand, light on, watching the door and listening to the sounds of the forest. Nothing happened. Dawn eventually lightened the cabin interior, revealing the footprints still clearly visible on the dusty floor. In daylight, I could see they were small, like a child's, but the pattern was strange. The toes were too long, almost claw-like. Despite my sleepless night and growing unease, I decided to continue my hike rather than turn back. I was already 2 days in, and returning would mean traversing the same difficult terrain I'd already covered. Moving forward seemed easier, and I hoped to reach the ranger station marked on my map by the following day. I could report the strange cabin there and maybe get some answers. I packed quickly, eager to leave the cabin behind. As I shouldered my backpack, a movement outside the window caught my eye, a flash of something pale disappearing into the trees. I hurried to the window but saw nothing except the endless green of the forest. The third day of hiking was the hardest yet. The trail all but disappeared in places, forcing me to rely heavily on my compass. The terrain became increasingly vertical, with slippery rock faces and treacherous ravines. Several times I had to backtrack and find alternative routes, burning precious daylight. To make matters worse, my GPS app kept glitching, showing me in completely different locations each time I checked. Eventually, I turned off my phone to save battery and relied solely on my map and compass. But even these seemed unreliable, as landmarks didn't match up with what was indicated on the paper. Either the map was wrong, or I was hopelessly lost. By late afternoon, exhaustion and anxiety had taken their toll. I had covered far less ground than planned, and the ranger station that should have been within reach now seemed impossibly distant. I found a small clearing to make camp, too tired to continue. As I set up my tent, I noticed unusual scratches on several trees surrounding the clearing. 3 parallel lines carved deep into the bark. They looked fresh, the exposed wood still light-colored and oozing sap. I told myself it must be from a bear marking its territory, but the cuts were too high, too precise. I built a larger fire than usual, the sense of being watched growing stronger as darkness fell. I cooked dinner mechanically, appetite gone, but knowing I needed strength. As I ate, I thought about the footprints in the cabin, the strange doll, and now these markings. Was someone following me? A hunter, perhaps, or another hiker with malicious intent? The night was clear, with a quarter moon providing just enough light to cast long shadows through the trees. I kept the fire burning hot, feeding it regularly and staying alert. Sleep was out of the question. Around midnight I heard it, singing. A soft, lilting melody drifting through the trees, too distant to make out words but undeniably human. The same melody from my dream. "Hello," I called, standing and shining my light into the forest. "Is someone there?" The singing stopped abruptly. Silence descended, heavier than before. Then came the sound of movement. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, coming from all directions, as if multiple people were circling my camp. I grabbed my knife, heart hammering against my ribs. "I hear you," I shouted, trying to sound brave. "I'm armed." A child's laugh answered me, high and sweet but somehow wrong, like broken glass wrapped in silk. It seemed to come from directly behind me, but when I spun around, nothing was there. Something hit the side of my tent with a soft thud. I whirled, light catching a small object rolling on the ground. Another stick doll, this one decorated with what looked like fresh blood. That was it. Panic overtook me, and I grabbed only my essentials: water bottle, knife, headlamp, and phone, stuffing them into my small day pack. I had to get out, find help, reach civilization. I abandoned my tent and the rest of my gear, plunging into the darkness with only my headlamp to guide me. I ran blindly at first, crashing through underbrush, slipping on loose rocks, driven by pure terror. The singing followed me, sometimes seeming far away, other times so close I could feel breath on the back of my neck. Several times I glimpsed movement at the edge of my light. A pale figure flitting between trees, always just out of clear view. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I stopped, lungs burning and legs shaking from exertion. I needed to be smarter. Running blindly through unfamiliar forest at night was a recipe for disaster. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to think. I pulled out my compass with trembling hands, trying to orient myself. As I studied the compass, I realized with growing horror that the needle was spinning wildly, never settling. My phone, when I checked it, showed no signal and a black screen where the map should be. I was truly lost. A twig snapped to my left. I whipped my head around, light catching a pair of eyes reflecting back at me from between the trees. Not animal eyes, but human. Too large, too pale. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice cracking. "What do you want?" "Laura," came the whispered response, my name stretched into too many syllables. Ray. Ice flooded my veins. I never told anyone my name. I hadn't encountered another soul since beginning my hike. I ran again, no longer caring about direction, just needing to put distance between myself and that voice. The forest seemed to fight against me, branches clawing at my clothes, roots rising to trip me, the ground itself becoming increasingly boggy and difficult to navigate. Eventually, I came to a sudden stop at the edge of a clearing. In the center stood a circle of stones, each about waist-high, arranged with obvious purpose. In the middle of the circle was a larger, flat stone that could only be described as an altar. Dark stains marked its surface. I knew I should turn back, find another way around. But as I started to retreat, the singing began again, this time from the direction I had come. I was being herded. With no other choice, I skirted the edge of the clearing, keeping as much distance as possible from the stone circle. As I passed, I noticed small objects hanging from the surrounding trees. More dolls, hundreds of them, dangling like grotesque fruit. Some appeared decades old, others freshly made. All had been crafted with the same twisted care as the ones I'd already encountered. I had nearly made it past the clearing when my light caught something that stopped me cold, a backpack hanging among the dolls. Not just any backpack, but one identical to the one I had abandoned at my campsite. Impossible. As I stood frozen, trying to process what I was seeing, the singing grew louder. This time, I could make out words. In the hollows, in the dark, where the lost ones leave their mark, flesh to feed her, blood to drink. Gone before you even think. The voice was directly behind me now. I turned slowly, light revealing what I had been fleeing from. She might have been beautiful once. Her face retained traces of delicate features, but the skin was stretched too tight over the bones, waxy and pale as moonlight. Her eyes were enormous, black from edge to edge, with no whites visible. She wore what might have once been a white dress, now stained brown and green from earth and vegetation. Her hair hung in long, tangled ropes to her waist, twigs and small bones woven into the strands. But it was her mouth that held my attention, too wide for her face, stretching nearly ear to ear in a terrible smile that revealed rows of needle-like teeth. "You came to my woods," she said, her voice both childlike and ancient. "No one comes to my woods anymore. They've forgotten me, but you came." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Terror had turned my muscles to stone, my voice to dust. "Are you lost, Laura?" she asked, cocking her head at an impossible angle. "I can help you. I know these woods, every tree, every stone." She took a step toward me, bare feet making no sound on the forest floor. "I am these woods." My paralysis broke, and I stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Stay away from me." She laughed, the sound like breaking ice on a frozen lake. "But you're already mine. You slept in my house. You breathed my air." She gestured toward the altar. "And now you're at my table." I turned to run, but found my path blocked by shapes emerging from the trees, pale, emaciated figures with the same two wide mouths and black eyes as the woman. Men, women, even children, all moving with the same unnatural fluidity I had glimpsed in my dream. "My family," the woman said from behind me. "They've been so hungry." One of the figures, a man with a beard grown so long it reached his waist, held out a gnarled hand. In it was another doll, this one made with blonde hair exactly the shade of mine. Understanding crashed over me like ice water. The dolls were trophies. Each one represented someone who had come to these woods and never left. The woman spoke again, her voice now at my ear, though I hadn't seen her move. "We need new blood. Our family grows weak. You're strong. You'll give us strong children." Her cold fingers brushed my cheek, and I acted without thinking, slashing backward with my knife. I felt it connect, heard her shriek, not in pain, but in rage. "Take her!" she commanded, and the figures surged forward. I ran, cutting through the circle of stones, leaping over the altar. Hands grasped at my clothes, my hair, my pack. I felt fingernails rake across my back, tearing through my jacket and into skin. Pain flared, hot and sharp, but fear drove me onward. I had no plan, no direction, only the desperate need to escape. I splashed through streams, scrambled over fallen trees, plunged through thickets that tore at my skin. All the while, I could hear them behind me. Not breathing hard, not crashing through underbrush as I was, but moving with terrible purpose, calling my name in sing-song voices. Dawn was breaking when I saw it, a road cutting through the forest ahead. civilization, safety. With the last of my strength, I sprinted toward it, legs numb, lungs burning. I broke through the tree line onto the asphalt, falling to my knees in exhaustion and relief. A car was approaching, headlights still on in the gray morning light. I waved frantically and it slowed, then stopped beside me. An elderly man rolled down his window, eyes wide with concern. "Miss, are you all right? You're bleeding." I turned to look back at the forest, expecting to see my pursuers emerging from the trees. There was nothing, just the quiet woods, peaceful in the new day's light. "They were right behind me," I gasped, struggling to catch my breath. The man followed my gaze. Who was? The woman. Her family. In the woods. I knew how crazy I sounded, but I couldn't stop the words. "They live in the hollows. They've been taking people." His expression changed, fear replacing concern. "You were in the hollows? Near Devil's Courthouse?" I nodded. "Get in," he said grimly. "Now." I didn't need to be told twice. I climbed into his truck, wincing as my torn jacket rubbed against the wounds on my back. As he drove, the man, who introduced himself as Earl Blackburn, told me what he knew. The Hollows had a dark history stretching back centuries. Long before European settlers arrived, the Cherokee considered it cursed ground, a place where the barrier between worlds was thin. They spoke of a woman who had once been human, but made a deal with dark spirits after her family died of disease. She gained immortality, but at a terrible price. She and her new family needed to feed on human life to sustain themselves. "Most folks around here know to stay clear of that place," Earl said, shaking his head. "They don't mark it on tourist maps for a reason. How'd you end up there?" I explained about finding the trail, seeking solitude after my divorce. Earl was silent for a moment. "Well, you're lucky to be alive. Most who wander into the hollows don't come out again." He glanced at me. "Though they might not be done with you yet." "What do you mean?" Cold fear settled in my stomach. "The Hag of the Hollows, that's what locals call her. She marks those she wants. If you encountered her and got away..." He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. Earl took me to the nearest hospital in Brevard, where doctors treated the deep scratches on my back. They asked what had happened, and I told them I had fallen while hiking. No one would believe the truth. While I was being treated, Earl spoke with the local sheriff. Later, they both came to my hospital room. The sheriff, a weathered woman named Sheriff Dawson, asked me to tell her exactly where I had been hiking. When I mentioned the cabin and the stone circle, her face grew grim. "We've had 3 hikers go missing in that area in the past year," she told me. "No traces found, despite extensive searches. You're the first person who's gone into the hollows and come out to tell about it." They wanted to mount a search for my abandoned gear, but I begged them not to. "It's not worth it," I insisted. "There's something evil in those woods." Sheriff Dawson looked like she wanted to argue, but ultimately nodded. "We'll mark that trail for removal from any maps it might still be on. Put up better warning signs." That night in the hospital, I couldn't sleep despite the sedatives they gave me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. That terrible smile, those black eyes. I heard her voice calling my name. The next morning, a nurse came in with a small package that had been left at the front desk for me. No sender name, just my name written in crude letters. Inside was a small doll made of sticks and blonde hair. My hair, with a note that contained just 4 words. "We know your name." I checked myself out of the hospital against medical advice and drove straight to the airport. I bought a ticket on the first flight out, not even caring where it was going. I ended up in Arizona, about as far from the forests of North Carolina as I could get. It's been 3 months since the Hollows. I've moved twice more since Arizona, never staying in one place long enough to feel settled. I avoid forests and rural areas, sticking to crowded cities where the constant noise and light help keep the memories at bay. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear singing, that same lilting melody floating through my dreams. and each place I've lived, I've found them. Small dolls made of local materials but crafted with the same twisted care, left on my doorstep or windowsill. A week ago, I found one inside my locked apartment, sitting on my pillow. They're coming for me. The Hag of the Hollows marked me as hers, and distance doesn't seem to matter. Her family is far-reaching, or perhaps they can travel in ways I don't understand. Either way, I know now that I'll never be free of them. If you're reading this, please, stay away from the hollows of Pisgah. No matter how clearly marked the warnings are, no matter how much you crave solitude, some places are empty for a reason. Some trails should remain untraveled. And if you ever hear singing in the woods, run. Run, and don't look back, because she knows your name now, too. My name is William Brown, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the most remote section of Lynville Gorge in North Carolina, a place the locals call the Grand Canyon of the East. The maps had promised an experience unlike any other: towering cliffs, pristine waterfalls, and solitude that city life had long denied me. What they didn't mention were the whispers that followed you there, or the feeling of being watched by eyes that existed long before humans dared to venture into these ancient woods. I'd spent the last decade trapped in fluorescent-lit corporate offices in Charlotte, my spirit slowly crushed under the weight of quarterly reports and performance reviews. The divorce last year had been the final blow. Jessica took the house, the friends, and what remained of my social life. All I kept was crushing debt and an acute awareness of my own loneliness. That's why I adopted Ranger, my German Shepherd, 6 months ago. He was a rescue, 3 years old with soulful eyes that seemed to understand depression better than any therapist I'd visited. When I decided I needed to disconnect completely from the digital world that had consumed me, Ranger was the only companion I needed. "What do you think, buddy? Ready for an adventure?" I asked him as we pulled into the small gravel parking area at the Lynville Gorge Wilderness Trailhead. The area was deserted. Mid-October wasn't prime hiking season, and the weather forecast had mentioned possible storms. Perfect for the solitude I craved. Ranger's ears perked up as he pressed his nose against the window, taking in the scents of pine and damp earth. His tail thumped against the seat in excited approval. I'd planned meticulously for this trip. 5 days of hiking along the most challenging and remote sections of the gorge. My backpack contained everything we'd need: tent, sleeping bag, food, water purification tablets, first aid kit, and a satellite phone for emergencies. I'd even packed Ranger's favorite chew toy. The first day's hike was everything I'd hoped for. The trail wound alongside the Lynville River, which roared with recent rainfall. Towering hemlocks and ancient oaks created a cathedral-like canopy overhead. The physical exertion cleared my mind in ways that meditation never could. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about Jessica, the divorce, or the mountain of debt. We made camp that evening near Babel Tower, a massive rock formation that jutted out over the gorge. As darkness fell, I built a small fire and heated a pouch of dehydrated beef stew while Ranger lay nearby, alert but relaxed. "This is the life, isn't it?" I said to him, scratching behind his ears as I ate. The stars emerged overhead, more brilliant than I'd seen in years. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like spilled silver. That's when I first heard it. So faint I almost convinced myself it was just the wind through the trees or the distant river. A whisper, almost like my name, but not quite. "William." Ranger heard it too. His head snapped up, ears rigid, eyes scanning the darkness beyond our small circle of firelight. "Just the wind," I assured him, though a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October air. I doused the fire and crawled into my tent, Ranger pressed against my side. Despite my exhaustion from the day's hike, sleep came fitfully. I dreamed of being watched by something ancient and patient, something that had been waiting for me specifically. The next morning dawned misty and gray. My phone showed no signal as expected, but the GPS still worked. We were right on track. We broke camp after a quick breakfast and continued deeper into the gorge. The trail grew more difficult as we descended toward the river, steep, rocky with sections where I had to navigate carefully over slick surfaces. Ranger managed it all with ease, his 4 paws finding purchase where my hiking boots slipped. Around noon, we reached the bottom of the gorge. The river rushed past, swollen with recent rain. According to my map, there was a series of small caves nearby that local legends claimed were once used by Cherokee medicine men for vision quests. I wanted to explore them before beginning the steep climb up the other side. "Stay close," I told Ranger as we moved away from the marked trail. He obeyed, but his demeanor had changed. His tail was low, and he kept looking back over his shoulder. The caves weren't large, more like shallow indentations in the rock face, but one was deep enough that I needed my flashlight to see the back wall. Ancient carvings covered the surface, worn by time but still discernible. Spirals, handprints, and what looked like stylized human figures with animal heads. "Look at this, Ranger. Must be hundreds of years old." As my fingers traced one of the spirals, a freezing sensation shot up my arm. I yanked my hand back, but the cold continued to spread, creeping up toward my shoulder. Simultaneously, Ranger began to growl, a deep, threatening sound I'd never heard from him before. I turned, expecting to see another hiker, or perhaps a wild animal at the cave entrance. Instead, the opening was filled with mist that seemed to move with purpose, swirling and condensing into a vaguely human shape. "Hello?" My voice echoed strangely, flatter than it should have in the small space. The mist didn't respond, but it continued to take form, becoming more solid, more defined. I could make out the suggestion of shoulders, a head, long hair that moved as though underwater. Ranger's growl intensified, and he positioned himself between me and the entrance, hackles raised. I fumbled for my phone, irrationally hoping for service, for some connection to the outside world. The screen remained stubbornly empty of signal bars, but the time caught my attention. 3:33 p.m. Oddly specific, and something about it raised goosebumps on my arms. When I looked up again, the mist was gone. The cave entrance showed only the gray afternoon and the green of distant trees. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Ranger, who was still tense, still growling softly. We left the cave quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I told myself it had been a trick of light, maybe carbon dioxide or some other gas causing mild hallucinations. There were scientific explanations for everything, but science couldn't explain why, as we climbed away from the river toward our planned campsite for the night, I kept hearing that whispered approximation of my name. William, William, William. And it couldn't explain why, when I checked my GPS, we appeared to be walking in circles despite following the clearly marked trail. "We've passed this tree before," I said to Ranger around 5 p.m., recognizing a distinctive lightning scar on a massive oak. "That's impossible," Ranger whined in response, pressing closer to my leg than usual. Consulting my paper map, I tried to orient myself. The sun was beginning to set, which meant west was... I frowned. The sun appeared to be setting in the east. That couldn't be right. A fog was rolling in, thick and unnatural for this time of day. Within minutes, visibility dropped to less than 20 feet. The temperature plummeted, and my breath clouded in front of me. "We need to make camp," I told Ranger, trying to keep the growing edge of panic from my voice. "We'll figure this out in the morning." I found a small clearing and quickly set up the tent with numb fingers. The fog pressed in, seeming to absorb sound. Even the constant rush of the distant river was muted to nothing. Inside the tent, I lit my small camping lantern and pulled out the satellite phone. No service, another impossibility. These phones were designed to work anywhere with a view of the sky. Ranger wouldn't settle. He paced the small confines of the tent, occasionally stopping to growl at the walls. "It's okay, buddy," I soothed, though I didn't believe my own words. I pulled out my regular phone to check the time. 9:33 p.m. The battery, which had been at 80% earlier, now showed 33%. The whispers came again, no longer just my name. I couldn't make out the words. They overlapped, multiple voices speaking just below the threshold of comprehension. They seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the tent. Ranger barked sharply, then growled at something outside. Heart pounding, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The fog had thickened further, with a faint luminescence that provided just enough light to see shapes, but not details. And there were shapes, moving at the edge of visibility. Human-like, but wrong somehow, proportions distorted as though viewed through warped glass. I zipped the tent closed and pulled Ranger close. "Just animals," I whispered. "Deer, maybe, or bears." Neither of us believed it. Sleep was impossible. The whispers continued all night, rising and falling like tide. Several times something brushed against the outside of the tent, something that felt deliberate, investigative. By dawn, the fog had dissipated, and exhaustion had left me hollow-eyed and trembling. Ranger looked no better, his usual energy replaced by wary vigilance. "We're leaving," I decided, packing up quickly. Straight back to the car. But which way was that? The GPS still showed us in circles, and the map seemed to describe terrain features that didn't match our surroundings. Even the compass on my watch spun lazily, unwilling to commit to a direction. I chose what seemed like the most logical path upward, hoping to reach high enough ground to orient myself. Ranger stayed so close he nearly tripped me several times. Around midday, we entered a meadow I didn't recognize. Wildflowers swayed in a breeze I couldn't feel. At the center stood a solitary cabin that looked both ancient and somehow pristine, as though it existed in two time periods simultaneously. "Hello?" I called out, desperate enough for help that I overlooked how impossible a cabin was in this protected wilderness area. The door creaked open slowly. No one emerged. Ranger's growl returned, deeper than before. "Is someone there?" I tried again. A figure appeared in the doorway, an elderly woman with silver hair that hung to her waist. She wore a simple dress that might have been fashionable a century ago. "You're lost," she said, not a question. "Yes, I'm trying to get back to the trailhead. My GPS isn't working." She smiled, revealing teeth too perfect for her apparent age. "No modern contraptions work properly in these parts. The old spirits don't like them." I should have been relieved to find another person, but something about her made my skin crawl. Her movements were too fluid, her eyes too bright. "Do you have a phone I could use, or can you point me in the right direction?" "I have something better," she said. "Food, rest, and directions that will actually lead you out. The paths change for strangers, you see. The gorge doesn't want you to leave." My rational mind rejected everything she was saying, but exhaustion and hunger made her offer tempting. And what choice did I have? "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Eliza Blackwood," she supplied, "but folks around here just call me the widow." She stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. Ranger refused to move, his body rigid with tension. "Your dog can come too," she said, though her bright eyes regarded him with something like wariness. "He's tired," I lied. "Maybe we could just sit out here for a bit?" Her smile faltered momentarily. "As you wish." She brought out a tray with what looked like homemade bread and a jar of honey. My stomach growled at the sight, reminding me I'd barely eaten since yesterday. "It's my own recipe," she said, pride evident in her voice. "The honey comes from my hives in the meadow." I looked around, seeing no beehives. In fact, now that I thought about it, there were no insects at all in this meadow. No buzzing, no fluttering. Unnatural silence except for the whisper of flowers moving in that unfelt breeze. "That's very kind, but I have my own food," I said, patting my backpack. "I don't want to impose." Something hardened in her eyes. "It's no imposition. I insist." The way she said it sent ice through my veins. Ranger's growl became more pronounced. "Actually, I think we should keep moving," I said, standing slowly. "Thank you, though." She moved with shocking speed, blocking my path. "No one leaves without tasting my honey. It's tradition." Up close, I noticed oddities I'd missed before. Her pupils were vertically slitted like a cat's. The silver of her hair had an iridescent quality, almost like spun metal, and her fingernails curled around the jar of honey were yellowed and thick like talons. "What are you?" The question escaped before I could stop it. Her smile widened, too wide for a human face. "Smart boy, smarter than most who wander into my meadow." Ranger lunged suddenly, teeth bared. The widow hissed, an inhuman sound, and jumped backward with impossible agility. I didn't wait to see more. I ran, Ranger at my heels, plunging into the trees at the meadow's edge. Behind us, the widow's voice rose in anger, transforming from elderly sweetness to something ancient and hungry. "You can't leave. The gorge has chosen you." We crashed through underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I had no direction in mind beyond away. The rational part of my brain tried to insist that what I'd seen wasn't possible, but fear drove me forward regardless. After what felt like hours of panicked flight, I collapsed against a tree trunk, lungs burning. Ranger stood guard, ears swiveling to catch any sound of pursuit. My watch read 3:33 p.m., exactly the same time as yesterday in the cave. The coincidence sent another wave of cold fear through me. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of our surroundings. We stood in a small clearing dominated by a massive, ancient oak tree. Carvings covered its trunk, similar to those I'd seen in the cave, but fresher. At the base of the tree lay small offerings. Bundles of dried herbs, smooth river stones, feathers tied with red thread, a shrine of some kind. The whispers returned, emanating from the tree itself. They formed words now, clearer than before. "William Brown, you shouldn't be here. This is not your time." I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices continued, now seeming to come from inside my own head. "You've trespassed in her territory. The widow doesn't forgive. She's marked you now." "Who are you?" I demanded aloud. "What do you want from me?" "We are the Watchers. We've guarded these woods since before your kind had names for fear. The widow is one of the old ones, a devourer of lost souls. She'll follow your scent now." Ranger barked at the tree, his tail stiff with aggression. "Your protector senses us. Good. You'll need him. Night comes soon, and she hunts best in darkness." As if on cue, the light began to fade at an unnatural rate. Sunset should have been hours away, but within minutes the clearing darkened to twilight. "How do I get out of here?" I asked the voices, desperation making me accept their impossible existence. "Follow the water downstream until you reach the falls. Behind the cascade is a path the old ones cannot tread. But hurry, she's already called her children to find you." The whispers faded, leaving only the normal sounds of the forest, which now seemed just as threatening in their mundanity. I checked my supplies quickly. Water running low. Food for maybe another day. The satellite phone still useless. "Come on, Ranger, we need to find water." Using the slope of the land, we headed downhill, hoping to intersect with the river. The forest grew denser, older, trees twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. Watching, waiting. I heard them before I saw them, rustling movements pacing us through the underbrush. Occasionally, I caught glimpses. Pale figures, vaguely childlike but moving on all fours with insect-like speed. "Her children," I whispered, remembering the voice's warning. Ranger saw them too. He stayed at my side but remained on high alert, occasionally snapping at shadows that moved too close. Night fell completely, forcing me to use my flashlight despite knowing it would make us more visible. The beam caught reflective eyes watching from between trees, dozens of them at different heights, blinking rarely. We found the river just as the moon rose, full and unnaturally large in the sky. Its light revealed what my flashlight had only hinted at. Our pursuers were humanoid but wrong, limbs too long and jointed in extra places, heads oversized and hairless, skin pale as cave fish. They kept their distance but continued to pace us, letting out occasional chittering sounds that resembled laughter. The waterfall had to be close. The sound of rushing water grew louder ahead, and the path alongside the river began to descend steeply. That's when Ranger froze, hackles raised, eyes fixed on something ahead of us. The widow stood on a boulder midstream, her silver hair floating around her despite the lack of wind. In the moonlight, she looked less human than before. Her proportions subtly wrong, her face too angular. "My children are hungry," she called, her voice carrying unnaturally over the sound of the water. "And you've made them chase their dinner. That's quite rude, William Brown." The use of my full name sent another wave of terror through me. I hadn't told her my last name. "Let us pass," I called back, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We mean no harm to you or this place." She laughed, a sound like icicles breaking. "Harm? No, you're not here to cause harm. You're here to sustain us. The gorge provides for its children, and you, William Brown, are its provision." The pale creatures edged closer, emboldened by their mother's presence. "The falls are just beyond her," I whispered to Ranger. "We have to get past somehow." As if sensing my plan, the widow's smile widened again, her jaw unhinging slightly to reveal more teeth than a human mouth should contain. "There's no escape that way," she said. "The falls are my domain." I remembered my camping knife, pathetically small against such creatures, but the only weapon I had. I drew it from my belt, the blade catching moonlight. The widow hissed at the sight of it. "Iron," she spat. "You come prepared." Iron. The old folklore about fae and spirits fearing iron. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence stood before me, inhuman and ancient. "Stay back," I warned, waving the knife. "Let us pass, and you'll never see us again." "Oh, I think not," she replied. "It's been so long since we've had such a delicious soul wander into our realm, and yours is particularly bright. All that anguish and hope mixed together. My children will feast for weeks." The pale creatures began to close in, forming a circle around us. Ranger's barking became frantic, spinning to keep them at bay. In desperation, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keys. Steel and iron, if I remembered correctly. I flung them at the nearest creature, not expecting any real effect. To my shock, the keys struck its arm and sizzled on contact. The creature shrieked, a sound like metal scraping glass, and recoiled, its skin smoking where the keys had touched. The widow's expression shifted from confidence to concern. "You shouldn't have done that," she hissed. "Now they'll make it hurt more." Out of options, I made a decision. "Ranger, come!" I shouted and sprinted toward the river directly at the widow. She stood her ground, clawed hands extended to catch me. At the last moment, I veered right, splashing into the cold water, using my momentum to move past her. Ranger followed, swimming powerfully through the current. The widow screamed in rage and lunged, her arm extending impossibly long, talons grazing my backpack. The current grew stronger as we approached the falls. The roar of water was deafening now, and spray filled the air. I caught glimpses of the pale children pacing us along the shore, unwilling or unable to enter the water. The widow was not so constrained. She moved through the river with serpentine grace, gaining on us. The edge of the falls loomed ahead, a deadly drop of at least 60 feet. But the voices had said behind the cascade was a path. "This way," I yelled to Ranger over the roar, angling toward the rock wall beside the falls. If the voices had lied, we were about to die. The widow was close enough now that I could smell her, an odor of honey gone rancid and something older, like opened graves. Her hand closed around my ankle with crushing strength. Ranger turned in the water and lunged at her, teeth closing on her wrist. She shrieked and released me, black ichor spurting from the wound. The current swept us over the edge of the falls, but instead of plummeting to the rocks below, we fell through what felt like a curtain of water and tumbled onto a narrow stone ledge hidden behind the cascade. A tunnel stretched before us, dimly illuminated by patches of luminescent fungi. Ancient steps led downward, carved directly into the living rock. Ranger shook himself, spraying water everywhere. He seemed unharmed by the fall, though just as confused as I was by our surroundings. Outside our hidden refuge, the widow's screams of rage were just audible over the thundering water. She couldn't follow, just as the voices had promised. We descended the steps, having no other option. The tunnel twisted downward, sometimes so narrow I had to turn sideways to progress. Ranger navigated it with more ease, his sleek body designed for such passages. Time lost meaning in that lightless place. My flashlight batteries began to dim, forcing me to use it sparingly. We rested occasionally, sharing the last of my food and water. Ranger never complained, though I could feel his ribs becoming more prominent under his wet fur. After what might have been hours or days, the tunnel began to slope upward again. Fresh air teased my nostrils, reviving my flagging spirit. We emerged into early morning light so bright it hurt my eyes. I blinked tears away, trying to orient myself. We stood on a rocky outcropping overlooking a different section of the gorge than where we'd entered. In the distance, I could see a paved road and what looked like the visitor center. My phone, miraculously, showed 1 bar of service. The date made me falter. We'd been in the gorge for 6 days, not the 3 I'd thought. As we made our way down to civilization, exhausted but alive, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see silver hair and 2 bright eyes watching from the tree line. We reached the visitor center just before noon. The ranger on duty looked alarmed at our appearance, dirty, bloodied from branch scratches, obviously malnourished. "Got lost," I explained simply, knowing the full story would sound like the ravings of a madman. "My GPS malfunctioned." He nodded sympathetically. "Happens sometimes in the deeper parts of the gorge. Some kind of magnetic anomaly, they say. You're lucky you found your way out. We've had 3 hikers go missing in that area this year alone." As he called for medical assistance, I asked as casually as I could manage, "Ever heard of someone called the Widow Blackwood? Lives in a cabin in the gorge?" His face changed subtly. "Where'd you hear that name?" "Just thought I saw it carved on a tree or something," I lied. He lowered his voice. "That's just an old local legend. They say she was a witch who lived here back in the 1800s. Supposedly lured travelers to her cabin and, well, they never came out again. But it's just a story parents tell kids to keep them from wandering too deep into the gorge." I nodded, scratching Ranger behind the ears. Just a story. Right. That night, safely checked into a motel with Ranger on the bed beside me, I examined the strange marks on my ankle where the widow had grabbed me. 5 perfect bruises in the shape of elongated fingertips, each centered with a tiny puncture wound. As I drifted toward exhausted sleep, I could have sworn I heard whispers again. Fainter now, but still recognizable. "She doesn't forget. William Brown. And she has all the time in the world to wait for your return." I never went back to Lynville Gorge. I moved west, as far from North Carolina as I could manage. But sometimes, on full moon nights, I wake to find Ranger growling at the window, eyes fixed on something I can't see. And in those moments, I swear I can smell honey gone to rot on the night breeze. My name is William Brown, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina, near a place locals call Hollow Pines. The first thing I noticed was the silence. That deep, unnatural silence that settles over the forest like a shroud, the kind that makes your ears strain for any sound at all. I'd been an avid hiker for years, but something about this particular stretch of Pisgah National Forest felt different. Wrong. the dense canopy of ancient hemlocks overhead blocked most of the late afternoon sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight beneath. "Hear that?" I asked my golden retriever, Rusty. He tilted his head, ears perked up, but didn't make a sound. No birds called, no insects buzzed. Nothing rustled in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to have died completely. We were 3 days into what was supposed to be a week-long solo backpacking trip through some of the most isolated parts of Pisgah. I'd planned this getaway for months. A chance to clear my head after my divorce from Karen was finalized. She'd called me obsessive, controlling, said I needed help. Maybe she was right. But out here, alone with my thoughts and my loyal companion, I could finally breathe again. Or so I thought. The trail ahead narrowed as it wound between massive boulders covered in thick, emerald moss. My hiking map indicated we were approaching Devil's Courthouse, an ominous name for a magnificent rock formation that loomed over this section of forest. According to local legend, the devil himself held court in a cave beneath the rocky outcrop, passing judgment on lost souls. Just tourist nonsense to attract visitors, I'd told myself when reading about it online. Now, standing in that unnatural silence with sweat cooling on my skin despite the humid July heat, I wasn't so sure. "Come on, boy," I urged Rusty, who had stopped dead in his tracks, hackles raised. "We've got another mile before we reach tonight's campsite." He whined, a sound I rarely heard from him, but reluctantly followed as I pushed forward. The sun was sinking faster than I'd anticipated, and something about these woods made me deeply uncomfortable after dark. We reached Black Rock Mountain Overlook Campground just as dusk settled fully over the forest. It wasn't much, just a small clearing with a stone fire ring and a primitive wooden bench, but it would do. I quickly set up my tent, gathered firewood from the surrounding area, and tried to ignore the growing sense of unease gnawing at my gut. The fire refused to catch properly despite my best efforts. The flames sputtered weakly, casting strange, elongated shadows that seemed to move independently of the flickering light. Instead of the usual warm orange glow, these flames burned with an unsettling bluish tinge around the edges. "Probably just some mineral deposits in the wood," I muttered to myself, trying to sound confident. Rusty wouldn't settle. He paced the perimeter of our campsite, occasionally freezing to stare intently into the impenetrable darkness between the trees. His behavior was starting to fray my already taut nerves. "What is it, boy?" I asked, straining my eyes to see what had caught his attention. Nothing but darkness stared back. I checked my phone. No service, as expected this deep in the backcountry. My GPS device showed our location, but something seemed off about the topographical markers. According to the screen, we were camped right on the edge of a steep ravine, but the ground around us was perfectly flat. "Technology," I scoffed, tucking the device away. "Always fails when you need it most." I heated some dehydrated beef stew over the strange-colored flames and ate without really tasting it. Rusty refused his food entirely. Another concerning first. After dinner, I crawled into my tent with him pressed against my side, his body tense and alert. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by strange dreams of being watched. Each time I drifted off, I'd jerk awake again, certain I'd heard someone, or something, moving around the campsite. But whenever I unzipped the tent to check, there was nothing, just that oppressive silence and darkness. Around 3 a.m., I woke to Rusty growling, a deep, threatening sound that vibrated through his entire body. Before I could fully process what was happening, he bolted from the tent, barking furiously. "Rusty!" I hissed, scrambling for my headlamp and shoes. "Get back here!" I stumbled out into the night. The fire had died to embers that glowed that same unnatural blue. My headlamp cut a weak swath through the darkness as I swept it around the clearing. "Rusty!" I called again, louder this time. My voice sounded flat and muffled, as though the very air was absorbing the sound. A bark answered from deeper in the forest, not the frantic barking from before, but a single, sharp sound that might have been a warning or a call for help. I grabbed my knife and a spare flashlight and plunged into the trees without thinking, following the sound. The forest seemed to close in around me immediately. Branches that hadn't been there during the daylight now clawed at my face and arms. Roots rose from the ground to trip my feet. My headlamp flickered ominously, the beam growing weaker with each passing minute despite the fresh batteries I'd installed before the trip. "Rusty!" I called again and again, panic rising in my chest. "Come here, boy!" Another bark, farther away now, then another, fainter still. I don't know how long I stumbled through the darkness. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My sense of direction, usually reliable, had completely abandoned me. The forest looked the same in every direction. Endless black trunks against deeper blackness. When I finally stopped to catch my breath and try to orient myself, I realized with growing horror that I couldn't remember which way I'd come from. My campsite could have been in any direction. The GPS device showed nothing but static when I powered it on. That's when I heard it. A low, melodic humming coming from somewhere ahead. It wasn't Rusty. It wasn't any animal I recognized. It sounded almost human, but not quite. Something told me to turn back, to run as fast and far as I could in the opposite direction. But Rusty was out there somewhere, and the thought of leaving him alone in these woods with whatever was making that sound was unthinkable. I crept forward, each step deliberate and silent as I'd learned from years of hunting with my father. The humming grew louder, occasionally broken by words in a language I didn't recognize, guttural and ancient sounding. Through a gap in the trees, I spotted a faint light. Not the white beam of a flashlight or the orange glow of a campfire, but a sickly green phosphorescence that seemed to pulse in time with the humming. I edged closer, keeping to the shadows. In a small clearing stood a figure. Even now, months later, I struggled to describe what I saw. It had the general shape of a woman, tall and gaunt with long matted hair that hung in tangled ropes down her back. She wore what might have once been a dress, now nothing but tattered rags that revealed too much of her grayish mottled skin. She stood bent over something on the ground, her back to me, those strange words flowing from her lips as her hands moved in complex patterns above whatever lay at her feet. With mounting dread, I realized it was Rusty. My loyal companion lay motionless on the forest floor, his golden fur dull in the green light. I couldn't tell if he was breathing. Around him, strange symbols had been drawn in the dirt, forming a perfect circle. At each cardinal point of the circle burned a small green flame, hovering inches above the ground without any visible fuel. Rage and fear coursed through me in equal measure. Without thinking, I stepped forward, snapping a twig beneath my boot. The humming stopped abruptly. The figure went completely still, her head cocked at an unnatural angle. Then, slowly, so slowly it seemed to take an eternity, she began to turn. I didn't wait to see her face. Some primal instinct screamed that looking upon her features would be the end of me. I lunged forward into the circle, scooped up Rusty's limp form, and ran. Behind me, a wail rose that froze the blood in my veins. Part fury, part hunger, wholly inhuman. It echoed through the forest, seeming to come from everywhere at once. The trees themselves seemed to bend toward me, branches reaching like clawed hands to hold me back. I ran blindly, Rusty's substantial weight growing heavier with each step. My lungs burned. My legs threatened to give out. But that unearthly wail drove me forward, terror lending me strength I didn't know I possessed. Something crashed through the underbrush behind me. Not the careful stalking of a predator, but the headlong rush of a hunter sure of its prey. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Then, miraculously, I burst through the trees and found myself back at my campsite. Without hesitation, I dumped Rusty, who had started to stir, thank God, inside the tent, grabbed my emergency flare gun, and fired a bright red star into the night sky. The wailing stopped the instant the flare illuminated the clearing with harsh crimson light. In that brief, blood-red flash, I caught glimpses of faces peering from between the trees, gaunt, hollow-eyed faces with two wide mouths stretched in silent screams. Then darkness again. I fired another flare, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the gun. This time, nothing watched from the trees. Whatever had been there had retreated from the light. I broke camp in record time, stuffing equipment haphazardly into my pack, not caring what got left behind. As soon as Rusty could stand, moving stiffly but seemingly unharmed, we set off down the trail. I didn't care what direction we went as long as it was away from that clearing and whatever waited in the darkness beyond. We walked through the rest of the night, the beam of my flashlight jumping nervously between the trail ahead and the woods to either side. Occasionally, I would catch movement in my peripheral vision or hear that faint humming floating on the breeze. Each time, I quickened our pace until we were practically jogging down the narrow trail. Dawn found us exhausted but alive, having covered nearly 15 miles according to my now functioning GPS. With the first rays of sunlight filtering through the canopy, the forest seemed almost normal again. Birds began to sing. Squirrels chattered overhead, but I didn't slow our pace. By mid-morning, we reached the ranger station at the Davidson River campground, a full 2 days' hike from where we'd been according to my map. The ranger on duty looked concerned when we stumbled in. Me, wild-eyed and filthy, Rusty limping slightly with strange, ash-colored symbols still visible in his fur despite my attempts to clean him. "You okay, sir?" the ranger asked, rising from behind his desk. His name tag read Frank Hooper. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded insane even to my own ears. I ended up claiming we'd been spooked by a bear and gotten lost trying to avoid it. Ranger Hooper nodded sympathetically, but I caught the skeptical look in his eyes. "Where'd you say you were camping? Black Rock Mountain?" When I confirmed our location, his expression changed subtly. "That area's been closed to campers for almost a year now." "What?" "No, it was clearly marked on my map," I protested, pulling out the trail guide I'd purchased specifically for this trip. He took it from my trembling hands, flipped through to the relevant page, and showed it to me. A large red area covered the entire section where we'd been, clearly marked, closed, no entry, with the date from last October. "But that's impossible," I stammered. "It wasn't marked when I planned the route. The trail was open. There were no barriers, no signs." Ranger Hooper's face grew grave. "There's a chain across that trail with warning signs every 20 feet. Has been since they found the Matheson family last fall." "Found them?" My mouth went dry. He hesitated, then apparently decided I should know. "Family of 4, experienced hikers. We found their campsite completely intact, food still cooking on the stove, sleeping bags laid out, but no people. Never did find them, just some strange markings in the dirt and their dog, still alive, but—" He trailed off, his eyes falling to Rusty. "Well, the dog wasn't quite right afterward. Had to be put down eventually." A chill ran through me as Rusty pressed against my leg, his body trembling slightly. "The locals call that area the Witch's Garden," Ranger Hooper continued quietly. "Old Appalachian folklore. They say a woman named Eliza Pritchard practiced dark magic there back in the 1800s. Locals hanged her for stealing children, but her body disappeared from the gallows before morning. Legend says she still wanders those woods, looking for sacrifices to extend her unnatural life." He must have seen the color drain from my face because he quickly added, "Just stories to scare tourists. Of course, probably some environmental hazard in that area causing hallucinations. Strange gases from decomposing matter or toxic fungi. That's why it's closed off." But his explanation sounded hollow, rehearsed. His eyes kept drifting to the strange markings still visible in Rusty's fur. I left the ranger station with a warning citation for entering a restricted area and the strong suggestion that I seek medical attention to make sure I hadn't been exposed to anything dangerous. I nodded and promised I would, but what I actually did was drive straight home to Charlotte, stopping only for gas and coffee to keep me awake. The following weeks passed in a fog of nightmares and paranoia. I took Rusty to 3 different vets, but none could explain the symbols in his fur, which refused to wash out or grow out with the rest of his coat. They formed patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, sometimes resembling letters in an alphabet I'd never seen, sometimes looking like crude drawings of faces frozen in expressions of agony. Rusty's behavior changed too. He spent hours staring at blank walls, head tilted as though listening to something I couldn't hear. He would wake in the middle of the night, pacing and whining at the bedroom door. Once, I found him sitting in the bathtub at 3 a.m., perfectly still, eyes fixed on the drain. Then came the humming. At first, I thought I was imagining it. That same eerie melody I'd heard in the forest, so faint it might have been the wind through the trees outside my suburban home. But gradually it grew louder, more insistent, always strongest in whatever room Rusty occupied. I started finding those symbols drawn in unexpected places, traced in the condensation on my bathroom mirror, formed by the arrangement of fallen leaves on my front walkway scratched into the dirt of my garden beds. Once, horribly, I woke to find them carved into my own forearm, the cuts shallow but precise, with no memory of how they'd gotten there. Last night, I woke to find Rusty gone from his usual spot at the foot of my bed. Following a strange green glow, I found him in the living room, sitting in the center of a circle of those same symbols, drawn in what looked horribly like ash mixed with blood, with small green flames burning at the 4 cardinal points. When he turned to look at me, his eyes glowed with the same sickly phosphorescence. His mouth opened in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. And he spoke. Not in a dog's voice, not even in a human one, but in that same guttural, ancient language I'd heard in the forest. The words crawled into my ears like insects, making my head pound and my vision blur. "She's coming," he said, finally switching to English, his voice a rasping parody of human speech. "Eliza has marked you. She always collects what's hers." I fled the house with nothing but the clothes on my back and my car keys. I've been driving aimlessly since then, stopping only to write this warning from a motel room 60 miles from home. My arm burns where the symbols were carved. They're spreading, darkening, moving beneath my skin like living things. Sometimes in the rearview mirror I catch glimpses of a gaunt figure in the back seat, a woman in tattered rags with matted hair hanging over her face. When I turn to look, the seat is empty, but the humming remains, growing louder with each passing hour. I don't think I have much time left. If you're planning a hike through Pisgah National Forest, or anywhere in the Appalachian wilderness, stay on marked trails. Respect the closure signs. And if you find yourself in a section of forest where unnatural silence reigns and the wildlife has gone quiet, turn back immediately. But most importantly, if you hear humming in the woods at night, run. Don't look back. Don't try to help whatever or whoever seems to be in distress. Just run. Because Eliza Pritchard doesn't just take you, she changes you, uses you, makes you into a beacon to draw others to her. Like Rusty. Like me. And now, I fear, like you. Because by reading these words, by letting this story into your mind, you've opened a door. Can you hear it yet? That faint humming at the edge of perception. She's coming for us all.